At my sister's engagement party surrounded by 100 wealthy guests, my father lifted his glass to toast his successful daughter, then smirked at me and asked when I was going to dump my poor farmer boyfriend and get a real job. The whole room laughed. I stayed completely silent and just took a sip of my wine. But when my boyfriend stood up to leave, my sister's future father-in-law gasped and dropped his glass, rushing over to bow to the man my family had just humiliated. My name is Abigail, 33 years old, and I spent my entire life being treated like the embarrassing stain on my family's perfect image. Before I tell you how one night completely destroyed their facade, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your success diminished by the people who should have supported you most. The Harrington estate in the Hamptons was suffocatingly opulent, designed specifically to make people feel small if they did not belong. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a golden glow over 100 members of the East Coast elite. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar. In the center of it all stood my younger sister Brittany, dripping in diamonds and wearing a custom silk gown that cost more than the initial seed funding for my first laboratory. Beside her stood Spencer Harrington, her fiancé, a man whose entire personality was built around his trust fund and his father's retail empire. My parents, Howard and Linda, hovered around them like moths drawn to a flame. They were in their element, rubbing shoulders with politicians and corporate executives, desperately trying to cement their status in a social circle they had spent decades trying to infiltrate. I stood near the back of the grand ballroom, keeping a deliberate distance from the main spectacle. I wore a simple, elegant black dress that I bought for myself, standing next to the man I loved. Liam was wearing a dark, high-quality flannel shirt, dark denim and clean, but noticeably worn leather work boots. Among the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer ball gowns, he stood out like a solitary oak tree in a garden of manicured plastic shrubs. Yet he carried himself with an effortless, quiet confidence that made the men in their expensive suits look strangely insecure. The sharp clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal flute cut through the ambient chatter. The string quartet stopped playing. The room fell silent as my father Howard stepped up to the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom. He raised his glass, his chest puffed out with absolute pride as he looked down at Brittany and Spencer. To my beautiful daughter Brittany, he began, his voice booming across the silent room. You have always been the pride and joy of this family. You navigated the corporate public relations world with grace, and now you are joining a family that truly understands the meaning of legacy. To Brittany and Spencer, a perfect match of ambition, class, and success. The crowd erupted into polite applause. My mother wiped a theatrical tear from her eye. Brittany leaned into Spencer, flashing a blinding, practiced smile for the photographers circling the room. I politely raised my glass, fully expecting the toast to end there, so I could quietly slip out the side door and drive back to the city. But Howard did not lower his glass. Instead, his eyes scanned the crowd sweeping past the politicians and the socialites until they locked directly onto me standing in the back. A familiar, cruel smirk twisted the corners of his mouth. And then we have my eldest daughter Abigail, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The room turned to follow his gaze. Suddenly, 100 pairs of judging eyes were fixed on me and Liam. Howard let out a short, mocking laugh. While Brittany is building a dynasty, Abigail is still out there playing in the dirt. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter washed through the crowd. Brittany covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with amusement. Spencer leaned over and whispered something in her ear, making her laugh harder. I just want to know, Abigail. My father continued, projecting his voice so everyone in the massive hall could hear every single word. When are you going to drop this ridiculous farming phase? When are you going to dump your poor farmer boyfriend and get a real job? You are 33 years old. It is time to stop digging in the mud and join the real world. The laughter in the room grew louder, bolder. The elite guests looked at Liam in his flannel shirt and boots with open disgust, viewing him as some kind of charity case I had dragged out of a barn. I felt the heat rising in my chest, a familiar burning sensation that I had learned to suppress over decades of emotional abuse. I did not cry. I did not drop my gaze. I stood perfectly still, maintaining unbroken eye contact with my father, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my red wine. Howard leaned against the grand banister, clearly enjoying the audience. 10 years ago, I refused to pay your college tuition because you wanted to study soil instead of business. I told you there was no future in agriculture. I told you that sustainable farming was a hobby for idealists with empty pockets. We tried to save you from this life of struggle. We begged you to take a position in my firm, but you chose to be stubborn. And look where it got you. Standing in the shadows of your sister's triumph, holding hands with a man who looks like he just got off a tractor. His words were meant to crush me, but they only served as a brutal reminder of the reality I had survived. While Brittany spent her 20s flying across Europe on my parents' maxed-out credit cards, I had been working 3 jobs to fund my agricultural technology startup. While she was buying designer handbags, I was patenting supply chain logistics for organic produce. Howard had no idea that my ag tech company was now revolutionizing the way food reached urban markets. He had never bothered to ask. To him, anything that did not involve a skyscraper and a suit was worthless. Beside me, Liam did not flinch. He did not turn red with anger or shrink under the humiliating gaze of 100 millionaires. He simply turned to me, his blue eyes calm and grounding. He gently placed his hand on the small of my back. "We do not need to waste any more time here," he said. His voice low and steady, meant only for me. I nodded. I placed my wine glass on a passing waiter's tray. Liam took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and we turned toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom. "Not so fast," a voice called out. Spencer Harrington stepped into our path, blocking the exit. He held a glass of champagne, his face flushed with arrogance and alcohol. My sister stood right behind him, her arms crossed, looking at me like I was something she had scraped off her shoe. Spencer looked Liam up and down, sneering at his work boots. "If the farmhand is taking you home, Abigail, do us a favor and use the service exit through the kitchen. We do not want you tracking fertilizer over the Persian rugs on your way out." Brittany giggled loudly. "Seriously, Abigail?" she chimed in, her voice artificially sweet. "You could have at least bought him a cheap suit from a department store. This is a high society event, not a barn dance. You are embarrassing Mom and Dad." I opened my mouth to respond, to finally unleash the decade of venom I had swallowed to keep the peace. But before I could speak a single word, the heavy double doors at the far end of the hallway swung open. Richard Harrington strode into the room. Spencer's father was a ruthless, terrifying figure in the business world, a man who controlled a vast empire of retail supermarkets stretching from New York to Miami. He had been tied up in an emergency board meeting all evening and had just arrived at his own estate. He walked briskly down the marble corridor, flanked by 2 anxious-looking executives. "Ah, the man of the hour," Howard announced from the stairs, trying to smoothly pivot the attention back to his wealthy future-in-law. "Richard, welcome to the celebration." Richard Harrington did not even look at my father. He stopped dead in his tracks about 20 feet away from us. He was holding a crystal tumbler of scotch that one of his executives had just handed him. His eyes locked onto the man standing beside me. The heavy crystal glass slipped from Richard Harrington's fingers. It hit the marble floor with a deafening crash, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sound echoed through the massive hall, bringing the entire party to an absolute chilling standstill. Richard pushed past his own son, nearly knocking Spencer out of the way. He ignored Brittany completely. He practically sprinted across the remaining distance, his face turning a sickly shade of ash gray. When he reached us, this ruthless titan of industry did the unthinkable. He bowed his head slightly, his shoulders hunched completely, ignoring the shards of glass near his expensive leather shoes. "Mr. Caldwell," Richard said, his voice trembling so violently that the microphone on the nearby stage picked it up. "I had no idea you were attending tonight. Why did your office not inform me? I would have cleared my entire schedule. Please forgive the lack of proper reception." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet where you could hear a pin drop. Spencer looked at his father as if the older man had suddenly lost his mind. "Dad, what are you doing?" Spencer asked, his voice laced with confusion and irritation. "Why are you apologizing to Abigail's gardener, Richard Harrington?" Whipped around, his eyes blazing with a terror and fury so intense that Spencer physically took a step back. Gardener Richard roared, his voice cracking with panic. "You ignorant, spoiled fool! This man is Liam Caldwell. He is the CEO and majority shareholder of Caldwell Agronomics." The name hit the room like a bomb. Even my parents, who knew nothing about agriculture, knew that name. Caldwell Agronomics was the monopolistic giant that controlled the organic supply chain for the entire North American continent. They owned hundreds of thousands of acres of sustainable farmland, cutting-edge distribution networks, and the vital contracts that kept massive retail chains afloat. Richard turned back to Liam, his hands actually shaking. "I apologize for my son, Mr. Caldwell. He knows nothing about the business. Please tell me this will not affect the renegotiations tomorrow. You know my supermarket chain cannot survive the third quarter without your exclusive supply contract. Our fresh produce division will collapse if you pull out. We are desperate for your signature." The reality of the situation crashed down upon my family like a collapsing building. The poor farmer my father had just humiliated in front of 100 people was the billionaire kingmaker who held the survival of the Harrington Empire in the palm of his hand. I watched the blood drain entirely from my father's face. Howard gripped the mahogany banister to keep his balance, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. Brittany looked like she was going to be physically sick, her hands flying to her throat as she realized she had just insulted the man her future father-in-law was currently begging for mercy. My mother Linda let out a sharp, audible gasp, pressing her hand against her chest. Liam did not raise his voice. He did not gloat. He looked at Richard Harrington with the cold, detached gaze of a man analyzing a bad investment. "I prefer to keep my business and personal life separate," Richard Liam said smoothly. "But since your son and his future father-in-law felt the need to publicly evaluate my worth, I suppose the lines have been blurred." "Mr. Caldwell, please," Richard pleaded, shooting a murderous glare at Howard on the stairs. "Do not hold me responsible for the stupidity of these people. I assure you Spencer does not speak for the Harrington Corporation." Liam adjusted the cuffs of his flannel shirt, completely unaffected by the panic radiating from the billionaire groveling in front of him. "We will evaluate our supply chain partnerships at the board meeting on Monday, Richard. But I must admit, I am highly concerned about the ethical judgment of your family's associations. If this is how you treat people you perceive as beneath you, I question your company's core values." Richard looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He spun around, pointing a trembling finger at my father. "Howard, get down here right now and apologize to Mr. Caldwell. Apologize to Abigail." My father practically tripped over his own feet, rushing down the grand staircase. The arrogant, booming patriarch from 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating man watching his social climbing dreams evaporate into thin air. He shoved past Brittany and practically lunged toward me, throwing his hands out in a gesture of fake affection. "Abigail's sweetheart." Howard stammered, his voice pitching high with panic. "Why did you not tell us? Why did you keep this a secret from your own family?" "Liam, please, it was just a joke. Just a bit of family teasing. You know how we are. We are thrilled to welcome you into the family." He reached out to grab my arm, trying to pull me into a hug for the audience. I stepped back instantly, my eyes locking onto his with absolute zero warmth. I raised my arm coldly, brushing his trembling hand away before it could even touch my dress. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the dead silent room. "And do not call me sweetheart. You made your position on this family very clear 10 years ago when you cut my funding, and you made it clear again tonight when you tried to use me as a punchline to impress people who do not even care about you." Howard swallowed hard, looking desperately at Richard, then back at Liam. "Please, Abigail, do not do this. Think of your sister. Think of her wedding." I looked over at Brittany. The golden child was shrinking back against the wall, her designer dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. Spencer was glaring at her, already placing the blame for this catastrophe squarely on her shoulders. "I am thinking of my sister," I said flatly. "I think she found exactly the kind of family she deserves." I turned to Liam, slipping my hand firmly into his. Poor farmers have an early morning, Howard. We have to go. I did not look back. I walked alongside Liam, our footsteps echoing against the marble floor as the crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. We pushed through the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the cool, crisp night air. Behind us, before the doors even fully closed, the silence in the ballroom shattered. I could hear Richard Harrington furiously screaming at Spencer and my father, his voice echoing with the unmistakable sound of an empire falling apart. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my agricultural technology firm, illuminating rows of vertical hydroponic farming units and digital displays, tracking soil moisture across 3 states. I stood in my glass-enclosed office, overlooking a team of 50 data analysts and agronomists. This was the dirt my father claimed I played in. A cutting-edge facility that was actively reshaping urban food distribution. I had barely sat down at my desk with a cup of black coffee when my assistant knocked on the door. She looked completely overwhelmed, holding a clipboard and peering over a massive arrangement of white orchids. Behind her, 2 delivery men were rolling in gift baskets overflowing with imported chocolates, expensive wines, and luxury spa vouchers. These just kept arriving all morning, my assistant said, setting the orchids down on my conference table. The lobby is practically a jungle. They are all addressed to you from your parents. I stared at the white orchids. They were Brittany's favorite flowers, not mine. Even when trying to buy my forgiveness, my mother could not be bothered to remember a single detail about my actual preferences. Throw the flowers in the compost bin for the research team, I instructed calmly. Send the chocolates to the break room and donate the wine to our annual charity raffle. Do not let any more deliveries pass the front desk. My assistant nodded and hurried out just as my cell phone began to vibrate against the sleek surface of my desk. The screen flashed with my mother's name. It was the 17th missed call since 7 o'clock this morning. I watched it vibrate, taking a slow sip of my coffee. I knew exactly what this was about. The panic had set in. The Harrington Empire was threatening to cut them off, and my parents were desperate. I let it ring out. 5 seconds later, the office phone rang, then my cell phone again. They were relentless. Deciding it was better to shut this down before they showed up and caused a scene at my headquarters, I picked up the phone and accepted the call. Abigail, darling. My mother. Linda's voice burst through the speaker, dripping with a sugary sweetness that made my stomach turn. I have been trying to reach you all morning. Did you get the orchids? We wanted to send a little something to brighten your office. My office is perfectly bright, Linda, I replied, keeping my tone entirely strictly professional. What do you want? Oh, do not be so formal with your mother. She chuckled, though the sound was tight and strained. Your father is right here on speakerphone. We just wanted to clear the air about last night. You know how these high society events are. The champagne flows, people get carried away with family banter. It was all just a silly misunderstanding. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at a real-time satellite feed of a farm in California. Calling my career a failure and insulting my partner in front of 100 wealthy investors is not family banter. It was a public execution. You just did not realize the guillotine was swinging your way. Howard's voice suddenly boomed through the speaker, attempting to sound authoritative but failing to hide the distinct tremor of panic. Abigail, let us not dwell on the past. We are a family and families forgive. Right now we have a much bigger issue on our hands and we need your help. I remained silent, letting them sit in their own anxiety. Richard Harrington called us at 6 this morning, Linda blurted out, losing the sweet facade entirely. He is absolutely furious. He is threatening to cancel the wedding. Spencer has blocked Brittany's number and she has been locked in her bedroom crying for hours. You have to fix this, Abigail. I did not break your relationship with the Harringtons, I said flatly. Your arrogance did. I suggest you tell Brittany to return that custom silk gown and start looking for a job. You listen to me, Linda snapped, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. This marriage is worth millions of dollars. It secures our standing in this community. You are the older sister. You have a responsibility to this family to ensure Brittany's future is protected. The absolute sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. For decades, they had treated me like a financial burden, an embarrassment to be hidden away. Now suddenly, I was the older sister with family responsibilities. And exactly how am I supposed to secure a multi-million-dollar marriage that Spencer is already running away from? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. You are going to call Liam right now, Howard ordered, reverting to his usual demanding tone. You are going to tell him to sign that exclusive supply contract with the Harrington retail chain by noon today, and you are going to make sure he gives Richard a substantial family discount. If Richard gets a favorable deal from Caldwell Agronomics, he will calm down and the wedding will go forward as planned. I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure disbelief. Let me get this straight. You spent 10 minutes publicly mocking a man's clothing, calling him a poor farmhand, and telling me to dump him. Now, less than 12 hours later, you want me to order that same billionaire to give your angry future-in-law a discount just so your favorite daughter can stay relevant. It is the least you can do after embarrassing us by keeping his identity a secret. Linda shrieked. If you had just told us he was a billionaire, we would have treated him with respect. You deliberately set us up to fail. You treat people with respect because they are human beings, Linda, not because of their bank accounts, I replied coldly. Liam runs a massive corporation with a board of directors. I do not dictate his corporate partnerships. And even if I did, why on earth would I ever advise him to partner with a dying supermarket chain run by a man who throws tantrums and breaks glasses on marble floors? Because she is your sister. Linda was screaming now, her voice echoing harshly through the phone speaker. Do you have any idea what this alliance means for our family? You are deliberately sabotaging her because you are a cold-blooded, selfish wretch. You have always been jealous of her beauty and her success. You planned this whole thing just to destroy her. The only thing sabotaging Brittany is the fact that she has absolutely nothing to offer a marriage, besides your maxed-out credit cards, and an inflated ego. I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. Caldwell Agronomics does not do business with liabilities. And as of today, the Harrington family is a massive liability. You listen to me right now, Howard roared into the phone. If you do not call Liam and fix this contract, you will regret it. I will sell that useless piece of dirt you call a research station. Do not forget who manages the deed to grandfather's land in the valley. You need that property for your little experiments. I paused. The land in the valley was the original site where I had tested my very first sustainable soil prototypes. My grandfather had left it to me in his will, but because I had been under 25 at the time of his passing, Howard had been named the legal custodian of the property deed. If you touch that land, Howard, you will be making the biggest mistake of your life, I warned. Then pick up the phone and call Liam. Howard sneered, clearly thinking he had just found his winning leverage. Or your precious agricultural startup loses its primary testing ground by tomorrow morning. I ended the call without another word. I dropped the phone onto my desk and stared out the window. Howard thought he was holding a royal flush, but he was holding a pair of twos. I tapped the intercom button on my desk console. Get my legal team on the line, I instructed my assistant. Tell them it is time to audit the property deed for the Valley Station. I suspect my father has done something highly illegal, and I want every single financial record he has attached to his name pulled immediately. My intercom had barely clicked off when a sharp, frantic commotion erupted beyond the glass walls of my office. My assistant, usually a fortress of calm, was being physically shoved aside in the hallway. The heavy glass door to my suite slammed open, hitting the stopper with a violent crack that made several agronomists in the bullpen look up from their monitors. Brittany stormed in. The picture-perfect socialite from the engagement party was entirely gone. Her blonde hair was a messy, tangled knot. Her designer mascara was smudged under her bloodshot eyes, and she was wearing a wrinkled trench coat over expensive yoga pants. She clutched a $5,000 handbag so tightly her knuckles were white, wielding it like a weapon as she marched right up to my desk. "You have to fix this!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "Spencer is not returning my texts. His father froze our shared accounts this morning. My wedding planner just called to say the deposit for the country club was flagged and denied by the bank. You ruined my life." I did not stand up. I simply folded my hands on top of my desk, looking at her with absolute detachment. Your wedding venue deposit is not my concern, Brittany. Security is already on their way up, so you have exactly 30 seconds to leave my building before you are escorted out in handcuffs. How can you be so cruel? She sobbed, stomping her foot against the hardwood floor like a petulant toddler denied a toy. I am your sister. We share blood. You are supposed to protect me, not let your billionaire boyfriend destroy my future in-laws. Pick up your phone, call Liam right now, and tell him to give Richard Harrington whatever he wants so I can get my life back. Protect you, I echoed, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. I stood up slowly, leaning my weight against the edge of my desk. Like you protected me when I was 25. Do you remember that year, Brittany? Because I certainly do. I was sitting in a commercial bank applying for the very first small business loan to build my vertical farming prototypes, only to be rejected by the loan officer because my credit score was completely decimated. Brittany's eyes darted away, a flash of guilt quickly masked by her trademark defiance. I am going to remind you of the exact details. I continued, stepping out from behind my desk. You stole my identity. You opened a platinum credit card in my name and maxed it out on a luxury spring break trip to Paris, champagne brunches, and a closet full of designer shoes. You defaulted on the payments and ruined my credit right when I needed it most. And when I confronted Mom and Dad with the paper trail, they told me to let it go because filing a police report would ruin your precious reputation. I had to work 3 extra jobs to pay off your debt just to clear my name so I could start this company. Do not ever stand in my office and lecture me about family loyalty. Brittany slammed her hands onto my glass desk, her face twisted in rage. That was years ago. You are a multimillionaire now, so what does a few $1,000s even matter? You are just holding a grudge because you are bitter and jealous that I found a wealthy man first. But you listen to me, Abigail. I work in public relations. I know every major lifestyle journalist, podcast host, and business blogger on the East Coast. She leaned in, lowering her voice into a venomous hiss. If you do not call Liam and save my wedding today, I will launch a media smear campaign that will completely obliterate your little ag tech company. I will tell the press that your sustainable farming practices are a scam. I will plant stories that Caldwell Agronomics is partnering with a fraudulent, toxic CEO. I will run a cancel culture campaign so fast your investors will pull their funding by the end of the week. I will ruin your reputation just like you ruined my wedding. I let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking my head at her sheer delusion. You really have no idea how the real world works, do you? My company relies on hard scientific data, audited supply chains, and federal agricultural contracts, not gossip blogs and Instagram influencers. If your PR firm prints a single defamatory word about my company, or Caldwell Agronomics, Liam's corporate legal team will bury you and your agency in so many defamation lawsuits, you will be paying legal fees until you are 80 years old. You want to play in the big leagues, Brittany. Welcome to the big leagues. We do not fight with internet rumors. We fight with lawyers. I reached under my desk and pressed the red security button. Less than 5 seconds later, 2 of my burly security guards flanked the office door. Escort this woman off the premises, I ordered, turning my back on her and walking to the window. If she returns, call the police and press trespassing charges. You cannot do this to me, Brittany shrieked as the guards grabbed her arms. She kicked wildly, her expensive shoes scraping against the polished floor. As they dragged her backward through the glass doors, her panic shifted into a venomous, desperate rage. You think you won? She screamed, her voice echoing through the entire open-plan office as employees watched in stunned silence. Dad is not just threatening to sell your precious valley land, Abigail. He already found a buyer. He is signing the transfer papers this afternoon to pay off his debts. Your research station is gone. You are going to lose everything just like I did. The heavy doors closed, muffling her hysterical cries as she was dragged toward the elevators. I stood alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. My jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached. My father was not just making empty threats on the phone earlier. He was actively moving to liquidate my grandfather's land today. The echo of Brittany's frantic screaming faded into the sterile hum of the office ventilation system. I stood by the glass overlooking the city, my mind racing through the legal technicalities of my grandfather's estate. Before I could even formulate a defensive strategy, my private line rang. It was a direct line, one only a handful of people possessed. I picked up the receiver. "I assume your sister delivered my message," Howard said. His voice had lost the high-pitched panic from earlier this morning. It was now replaced by a chilling manufactured calm, the sound of someone who believed they had just cornered their prey. "She delivered a tantrum," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "But she did mention you are trying to sell the Valley property. A bold move considering you do not actually own it." "I am the legal custodian of the trust," Howard countered smoothly, the smugness radiating through the speaker. "Your grandfather left that land in my managerial control until you turned 35. I have full fiduciary authority to liquidate assets if the estate requires immediate capital, and right now, the estate requires capital. I am sitting in a conference room at a title company in downtown Manhattan. Across from me is a commercial developer with very deep pockets. The contracts are printed, Abigail. They are offering cash to bulldoze your little science fair project and put up luxury condominiums." I gripped the edge of my desk. The Valley Station was not just a piece of dirt. It was the beating heart of my entire operation. It housed our proprietary vertical farming rigs, 5 years of irreplaceable climate adaptation data, and the prototype biosensors that had just secured my company a massive federal grant. Uprooting that facility would cost millions in logistics, but worse, it would completely derail our research timeline. Howard knew exactly where to strike. He had aimed for the jugular. "Grandpa left that land specifically for agricultural preservation," I stated, keeping my breathing measured. "Selling a performing asset to a commercial developer below market value to cover your own personal debts is a massive breach of fiduciary duty. If you sign that paper, I will drag you into probate court and bleed you dry with litigation." Howard let out a dry, abrasive laugh. "You can try, but by the time a judge hears the case, your greenhouses will be parking lots. The developer has demolition permits ready to go. You forced my hand, Abigail. You humiliated us. You embarrassed Richard Harrington. You jeopardized your sister's multi-million-dollar future. Now there are consequences." He paused, letting the silence stretch, waiting for me to break. When I did not, he presented his extortion. "You have exactly 2 hours," Howard demanded. "Call Liam, get the exclusive Caldwell Agronomics supply contract signed and delivered to Richard Harrington's office by noon. And make sure the pricing guarantees Spencer's inheritance. You fix the Harrington crisis, and I will get up and walk away from this table. The Valley land remains yours to play in. Refuse and the bulldozers arrive at your research station on Monday morning. The choice is yours." This was the ultimate gaslighting maneuver. He was actively attempting to destroy my life's work while framing it as a choice I was making. He expected me to panic. He expected the little girl who used to seek his approval to surface crying and begging him not to destroy the one thing connected to my grandfather. He expected me to leverage my relationship with a billionaire to save his own miserable social standing. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the cold, hard reality wash over me. I was not that little girl anymore. I was a chief executive officer who managed a multi-million-dollar supply chain. I negotiated with ruthless suppliers and navigated complex federal regulations daily. I did not negotiate with terrorists even if they shared my last name. "Are you listening to me?" Abigail Howard snapped, his impatience flaring when I did not immediately surrender. 2 hours. Call your boyfriend. "I hear you perfectly, Howard," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "You are sitting in a room with a developer threatening to destroy your own daughter's company to appease a supermarket executive who treats you like a servant. You think you are demonstrating power, but all you are showing me is profound desperation." "Do not play games with me," he barked. "I will sign it, then sign it." I challenged, my words cutting through the air like a knife. "Sign the paper, Howard. Let them bulldoze the greenhouses. Because if you think I am going to prostitute my partner's corporation to save you from the mess you created, you are completely out of your mind. I do not bargain with cowards, you arrogant, selfish." I ended the call. I did not slam the phone. I set it down with absolute terrifying precision. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was crystal clear. Howard was rushing a real estate transaction on a Friday morning. He was frantic for cash, ignoring all standard probate protocols, and desperate enough to risk a massive lawsuit. People only move that recklessly when they are cornered. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," I told my assistant, "and get Harrison, our lead internal counsel, into my office right now. Tell him it is a code red." Less than 2 minutes later, my corporate attorney strode into the glass suite. He was a sharp, unrelenting former corporate litigator who thrived on destroying hostile takeovers. He took one look at my face and closed the door behind him, locking it. "What is the situation?" Harrison asked, pulling out a legal pad. "My father is currently attempting to liquidate the Valley Research property under the guise of his custodial trust rights," I explained rapidly, pacing the length of my office. "He claims he is selling it to a commercial developer to inject liquidity into the estate. But his timing is entirely wrong. He is panicking. He needs cash instantly, and he is trying to use the land as leverage to force a corporate contract out of Caldwell Agronomics." The lawyer frowned, tapping his pen against the paper. "A custodial trustee cannot just liquidate a performing asset overnight without massive red flags, especially not to cover personal liabilities." "Exactly," I said, stopping by the window. "He is desperate. Brittany mentioned earlier that he is bleeding money. I need you to bypass the standard property checks and dig directly into his personal financial footprint. Check all his debt and loan records across the board. Every shell company, every hidden LLC, every line of credit attached to his name." I turned to face my lawyer, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together in my mind. "Check the Valley property deed again," I ordered, my eyes narrowing as the realization hit me. "I do not think he is actually selling the land today. You cannot close a commercial real estate deal that large in a matter of hours. I suspect he already leveraged it. I suspect he illegally mortgaged my grandfather's land months ago to fund his fake lifestyle, and now the bank is calling in the debt. Find out who he owes and find out exactly how much." Harrison nodded sharply, already typing furiously on his tablet as he left my office to execute the financial audit. I sat back down in my leather chair, taking my first real breath of the morning. But the silence in my glass suite was incredibly short-lived. My computer screen lit up with a breaking news alert from an industry blog, followed immediately by a frantic text from my lead investor. The Harrington family was not just fighting on the real estate front. They had unleashed the dogs of war. I clicked the link glowing on my monitor. The headline glared back at me in a bold, aggressive font. It was a vicious, highly coordinated smear campaign. Brittany was using every single public relations contact she had ever cultivated in her shallow career. She and Spencer were flooding the high society gossip channels and financial rumor mills with a completely fabricated narrative. According to the manufactured story, I was not a self-made agricultural pioneer. I was a calculating gold digger. The articles painted a highly damaging picture of a desperate, failing businesswoman who had seduced a billionaire to bankroll her fraudulent green technology startup. They claimed my vertical farming data was faked, that my entire company was just a vanity project funded by Liam Caldwell. Brittany had even leaked cherry-picked out of context emails from years ago to make it look like I had been scheming to trap a wealthy man to fund my delusions. The comment sections were already swarming with internet trolls, tearing apart my appearance, my credibility, and my company's mission. My desk phone chirped with a priority line override. It was my lead venture capital investor. "Abigail, what exactly is going on?" His voice crackled through the speaker, tight with anxiety. "My inbox is flooded with alerts calling your soil data fabricated. We poured millions into your vision. Please tell me you have this under control." "The data is rock solid and you have seen the audits yourself," I replied, keeping my tone exceptionally calm to counteract his mounting panic. "This is a coordinated smear campaign executed by my estranged family to force a corporate concession. Do not sell a single share and do not issue a public statement. Trust the process." He grumbled but agreed to hold the line for 24 hours. I hung up the phone just as my lead operations manager burst into my office. He did not even bother knocking. "We have a massive problem at the new facility," he said, dropping a thick stack of manila folders onto my desk. The city zoning board just pulled our permits for the downtown lab expansion. The Environmental Protection Department flagged our water recycling system for an emergency review. We are completely stalled. Every construction crew has been ordered to stand down indefinitely. I stared at the red stamped documents. My water recycling system had passed every federal standard with flying colors just 2 weeks ago. This was not a bureaucratic error. This was a targeted surgical strike. Spencer Harrington was flexing his family's political muscles. The Harrington retail empire brought millions in tax revenue to the city, giving Spencer the exact kind of leverage needed to make a few phone calls and bury my permits under a mountain of red tape. He was trying to suffocate my business operations while Brittany assassinated my character. The boardroom doors swung open again. Liam walked in. He did not look like the quiet, understated man from the engagement party anymore. His jaw was set in a hard, unforgiving line, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My operations manager took one look at Liam's face and quickly excused himself, closing the heavy glass door behind him. Liam walked directly to my desk. He had seen the articles. He knew about the permits. "Give me the word," Liam said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "My public relations division will have your sister blacklisted from every media agency on the East Coast by dinner time. My legal team will file injunctions against Spencer Harrington and the zoning board that will make their heads spin. I can crush this entire campaign before the market closes. Just say the word." It was a tempting offer. Liam possessed the infinite resources to wipe Spencer and Brittany off the map with a single phone call. But using his power to fight my battles would only prove their false narrative right. It would validate every vicious rumor Brittany had planted about me relying on a billionaire to save my skin. I needed to win this war on my own terms. "No," I said, standing up and walking around the desk to take his hands. "If you crush them with a massive lawsuit, they become martyrs. Brittany will spin it to make herself look like the victim of corporate bullying. Spencer will hide behind his father's lawyers. I do not want to just swat them away. I want them to destroy themselves." Liam's eyes narrowed, his protective anger shifting into sharp, calculating interest. He knew me well enough to recognize when I was formulating a strategy. "What do you have in mind?" he asked. "They are attacking my company to force us into signing that retail supply contract with Richard Harrington," I explained, pacing the floor. "Spencer thinks if he squeezes my business hard enough, I will beg you to sign the deal just to make the pain stop. We are going to give them exactly what they want, but wrapped in poison. We are going to set a trap." I stopped and looked Liam directly in the eyes. "I need you to leak a piece of highly confidential information directly to Richard Harrington. I want you to make sure Richard knows that Caldwell Agronomics was fully prepared to sign that exclusive supply contract today, but tell him you are personally pulling the deal off the table completely." Liam raised an eyebrow, grasping the angle immediately. "And what reason am I giving him for killing the contract?" I smiled, a cold, strategic expression. "You are going to tell Richard that you refuse to partner with a corporation represented by Spencer and Brittany. Tell him that Spencer's unethical manipulation of city permits and Brittany's toxic media smear campaign show a severe lack of corporate maturity. Make it explicitly clear to Richard Harrington that his own son and his future daughter-in-law are the direct and only reasons his supermarket chain is about to lose its most vital supply line." Liam let out a dark, appreciative chuckle. "Richard will lose his mind. He is already desperate for this deal. If he finds out Spencer and Brittany are actively sabotaging his last lifeline to save his retail empire, he will not just yell at them. He will annihilate them." "Exactly," I replied, turning back to my desk to review the stalled permit files. "We do not need to fight Spencer and Brittany. We just need to hand Richard Harrington the match and watch him burn their entire world to the ground. Let the shareholders panic for one more day. By tomorrow morning, the Harrington family will be eating each other alive." Liam did not waste a single second. He stepped away from my desk and pulled a sleek black encrypted phone from his jacket pocket. This was not the device he used to schedule dinner reservations or call his driver. This was the direct line he used to move global markets. He dialed a number, holding my gaze as the line connected. I watched him transform instantly from the supportive partner into the apex predator of the agricultural sector. The shift was subtle but terrifyingly effective. "Gordon," Liam said, his voice dropping into a smooth, authoritative baritone, "I have an exclusive for you. Yes, for the afternoon financial dispatch. You are going to want to run this immediately." He was speaking to Gordon Reese, one of the most feared and respected financial journalists on Wall Street. A single article from Gordon could make or break an initial public offering. An exclusive quote from Liam Caldwell, given directly to Gordon, was the corporate equivalent of a nuclear launch code. "I am officially withdrawing Caldwell Agronomics from all current and future supply chain negotiations with Harrington retail supermarkets," Liam stated clearly, pacing the length of my glass office. "You can print that on the record." I could hear the faint, frantic scratching of a keyboard through the receiver. Gordon was undoubtedly salivating. The Harrington deal had been the most highly anticipated retail merger of the quarter. "The reason is simple," Liam continued, his eyes locked on mine, perfectly executing the script we had just built. "At Caldwell Agronomics, we hold our corporate partners to the highest standard of professional integrity. After observing the recent behavior of the Harrington family's future executives, I have deep concerns over their business ethics. We refuse to attach our sustainable supply chain to a corporation represented by individuals who engage in targeted harassment, manipulate municipal zoning permits for personal vendettas, and run malicious media smear campaigns." He paused, letting the devastating weight of those words sink in. "Spencer Harrington and his fiancée have demonstrated a severe lack of corporate maturity," Liam added, driving the final nail into the coffin. "We cannot trust our national distribution network to a retail empire that allows its heirs to operate like petty thugs. You can quote me directly on all of that. The deal is dead, Gordon. Printed." Liam ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The trap was set. The bait was in the water. Now all we had to do was wait for the sharks to bite. "How long until the article goes live?" I asked, moving back to my desk to check the financial ticker running on my secondary monitor. "Gordon works fast when he smells blood," Liam replied, checking his watch. "Give it 20 minutes, half an hour at most." The waiting was electric. The atmosphere inside my office felt heavily charged, like the air right before a massive thunderstorm. Outside my glass walls, my employees were still anxiously refreshing their feeds, watching Brittany's cheap gossip articles circulate. They had no idea that a massive tidal wave was about to wash all of that garbage away. I did not issue any company-wide memos. I did not send out panicked emails trying to defend my character. I simply sat in my chair watching the stock market terminal, my hands steepled under my chin. This was the difference between old money arrogance and self-made power. Brittany and Spencer thought power was throwing tantrums, flaunting designer clothes, and bribing low-level bloggers to write nasty rumors. They thought they could bully me into submission by attacking my reputation and suffocating my permits. They fundamentally misunderstood the arena they had just stepped into. I did not care about socialite gossip. I cared about equity market capitalization and shareholder confidence. Exactly 24 minutes later, my computer monitor flashed red. Then my lead investor's private number lit up my phone again. I did not answer it. I did not need to. A push notification simultaneously illuminated every single smartphone in the building. A collective gasp echoed through the bullpen outside my office as 50 data analysts and agronomists stopped working at the exact same moment. The Financial Dispatch had just published the exclusive. The headline dominated the screen in stark, unforgiving black text. "Caldwell Agronomics ceases all negotiations with Harrington retail billionaire CEO cites deep ethical concerns over Spencer Harrington and future wife." I clicked the link. Gordon had not held back. He had printed Liam's quotes verbatim. The article detailed how the highly anticipated supply contract, which was widely considered the only lifeline capable of saving the struggling Harrington supermarket chain from bankruptcy, had just been brutally killed. Gordon explicitly highlighted Spencer's manipulation of my company's city permits, and Brittany's ridiculous smear campaign, framing them not as high society drama, but as massive corporate liabilities that had just cost their family billions. "Look at the ticker," Liam murmured, coming to stand right behind my chair, his hands resting heavily on my shoulders. I shifted my gaze to the financial terminal on my right screen. The reaction was instantaneous and violently severe. Wall Street absolutely hated uncertainty, but they hated reckless, unethical executives even more. When the undisputed king of the agricultural supply chain publicly declares a retail partner too toxic to touch, investors run for the exits. The Harrington retail stock, listed under the ticker symbol HRG, had opened the morning relatively stable. The moment the article went live, a massive red spike drove the graph straight down. It dropped 4% in the first 3 minutes, then 7%. Institutional investors were triggering automated sell-offs. Mutual funds were dumping their shares. The trading volume was skyrocketing as sheer panic seized the market. Within 15 minutes, the stock had plummeted a staggering 14%. Hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization were evaporating into thin air with every refresh of the screen. My desk phone started ringing endlessly. My email inbox counter spun out of control as suppliers, contractors, and board members scrambled to understand the fallout. But I did not reach for the phone. I just watched the red line on the graph continue its devastating descent. Spencer and Brittany wanted to play games with my livelihood. They wanted to destroy the research station my grandfather left me. They wanted to humiliate me to secure their own unearned luxury. They had just cost Richard Harrington a significant portion of his net worth in less than 20 minutes, and the bleeding had not even stopped yet. The New York Stock Exchange had just hit the Harrington empire with a sledgehammer. The Harrington stock immediately plummeted, plunging the entire retail giant into absolute chaos. My private line rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed a number I had never seen before, routed directly from the executive suites of Harrington Retail. I glanced at Liam. He nodded, gesturing for me to put it on speaker. I hit the button. Before I could even offer a standard corporate greeting, the sound of a man completely losing his grip on sanity blasted through my office. It was Richard Harrington, and he was not calling to negotiate. He was calling to beg, while simultaneously executing his own son in the background. "Mr. Caldwell?" Richard gasped, his breath ragged, clearly thinking Liam was the only one on the line. "Please tell me you are listening. I am standing in my boardroom right now, and I have Spencer pinned to the wall. I swear to you on my life I had absolutely no idea what he and that foolish girl were doing." In the background of the call, I could hear the unmistakable sound of a grown man whimpering. It was Spencer. The arrogant trust fund heir, who had mocked Liam's boots the night before, was now sobbing like a disciplined child. "Tell him!" Richard roared, the sound of a physical scuffle echoing over the speakerphone. "Tell Mr. Caldwell what you did, you absolute parasite. You just wiped out $400 million of our valuation in 20 minutes. Dad, please," Spencer cried out. "Brittany said her sister was just a scam artist. She said Abigail was bluffing about the supply chain. We just wanted to put her in her place." Richard let out a sound that was half scream, half growl. "You arrogant liability. You do not touch municipal permits for a vendor without board approval. You do not run smear campaigns against the only supplier keeping our produce aisles stocked. I am bleeding institutional investors by the second." Liam leaned close to the microphone, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade of ice. "Richard, you are on speakerphone with Abigail and me. We are watching your stock crater. I suggest you get your house in order." There was a sharp gasp on the other end. Richard's tone immediately shifted from violent rage to absolute groveling submission. "Abigail," Richard pleaded, stripping away every ounce of his billionaire pride. "I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I have Howard and his wife in my office right now. I summoned them the second the article hit the terminal. They are standing right here watching their daughter's wedding evaporate." I could hear my mother Linda sobbing hysterically in the background. Howard was stammering, trying to offer pathetic excuses about family misunderstandings. Richard silenced them with a vicious bark. "Shut your mouths!" Richard snapped at my parents. Then he returned to the phone. "Abigail, Liam, I am canceling the wedding. I am freezing Spencer's trust fund. I will publicly terminate his position on my board before the market closes. Just please issue a retraction. Tell the press we are still at the table." I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the glass desk. You cannot retract the truth, Richard. Your son abused his political leverage to stall my city permits, and your future daughter-in-law tried to destroy my company's reputation. You brought a toxic family into your inner circle. The market is just responding to your poor judgment. Then I will make them fix it, Richard declared, his voice trembling with sheer desperation. I will march them down to your headquarters myself if I have to. They will beg for your forgiveness. Howard, Linda, Brittany, and Spencer. They will get on their knees in your lobby. I am not interested in theatrical apologies, I said coldly. It is not a request, Richard insisted, his panic reaching a fever pitch. If they do not walk into your building and apologize to your face, the wedding is permanently canceled. I will personally ensure Howard's creditors call in every single loan he owes by 5 o'clock today. I will ruin them. They are leaving my office right now. Please just listen to them. The line went dead. I looked at Liam. He was leaning against the window frame, a dark, satisfied smile playing on his lips. They are coming here, he noted. Let them come, I replied, turning to my computer. I tapped a few keys, clearing my schedule for the next hour. Exactly 45 minutes later, my desk console beeped. My head of security spoke through the intercom. Ma'am, you have guests in the main lobby. Howard, Linda, and Brittany are here. They are demanding to see you. They look highly distressed. Do not let them up to the executive suite, I instructed. I will come down to them. I grabbed my smartphone, swiped open the voice memo application, and hit the red record button. I slipped the phone securely into the pocket of my blazer, ensuring the microphone was unobstructed. I wanted an undisputable audio record of every single word they were about to say. I stepped out of the elevator into the expansive sunlit atrium of my AgTech headquarters. The lobby was bustling with employees, delivery personnel, and visiting scientists. In the center of this high-tech corporate ecosystem stood my family. They looked entirely broken. The arrogant facade they had worn at the engagement party was completely obliterated. Brittany was pale and shaking her eyes, darting nervously around the gleaming facility she had sworn to destroy. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, desperately trying to hide her swollen, tear-streaked face. Howard's tailored suit looked rumpled, his shoulders hunched as if he carried the physical weight of his massive, undisclosed debts. Linda was gripping her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were stark white. They saw me approaching. None of them dared to speak first. I stopped 10 feet away, folding my arms, letting the silence stretch out and crush them. Well, I said, my voice carrying easily across the marble floor. I was told you had something important to say. Say it quickly. I have a company to run. Howard swallowed hard. He looked around the lobby, acutely aware that several of my security guards and receptionists were watching them closely. He forced himself to take a step forward, his face twisting with a deeply ingrained reluctance. Abigail Howard started, his voice barely a hoarse whisper. We are here to apologize. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. I cannot hear you, Howard. You were much louder when you were threatening to bulldoze my research station this morning. Speak up. Howard ground his teeth together. The muscles in his jaw pulsed with humiliated rage, but he had no leverage left. We are sorry, he forced the words out louder this time. We crossed a line. We should not have threatened your property. And the smear campaign, I asked, turning my gaze to Brittany. The one you orchestrated to label me a fraud. Brittany flinched as if I had struck her. She looked down at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. Richard is going to cancel the wedding, she sobbed, her voice cracking. He canceled my credit cards. Spencer will not even look at me. Please, Abigail, you have to call the press. You have to tell them the rumors were a mistake. I am sorry. I take it all back. Just save my wedding. Linda stepped forward, trying to grab my hand, but I took a sharp step backward. Abigail, please. My mother begged, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. We are begging you. We will do anything you want. Just tell Liam to sign the contract. If Richard ruins us, we will lose the house. We will lose everything. We are your family. I felt the smooth metal of my phone in my pocket, silently recording every pathetic, groveling plea. They were not sorry for the abuse. They were not sorry for mocking Liam or threatening my life's work. They were only sorry that their actions had finally caught up to them and the bill had arrived. "You are not my family," I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the lobby. "You are just panicking debtors who miscalculated their target. I am not calling the press, and Liam is not signing that contract." Howard's head snapped up, his eyes widening in pure terror. "You cannot do this. We came here and apologized. Richard said if we apologized, you would fix it." I smiled, cold and unyielding. "Richard Harrington lied to you, Howard. Just like you lied to me for years. The exit is right behind you. Have a safe trip back to whatever is left of your estate." My security team did not wait for Howard to formulate another pathetic excuse. They stepped forward in unison, physically blocking my family from advancing any further into the corporate lobby. I turned on my heel and walked toward the private executive elevator without looking back. The sound of my mother's muffled weeping and Brittany's frantic hyperventilating was completely drowned out by the heavy metallic slide of the elevator doors sealing shut. By the time the carriage reached the executive floor, my heart rate had leveled out to a steady, calm rhythm. The emotional baggage I had carried for over 3 decades had just been severed permanently. I walked back into my glass-enclosed suite, ready to resume my workday, but Harrison was already sitting at my conference table. My lead corporate counsel had several thick, red-tabbed folders spread across the polished mahogany surface. He did not look like a lawyer who had just uncovered a minor real estate infraction. He looked like a forensic accountant who had just stumbled onto a catastrophic financial crime scene. "Close the door," Abigail Harrison instructed, not even looking up from the sprawling array of bank statements, property deeds, and wire transfer logs. "You were right about the Valley Research property. He did not sell it today. He could not. The title is already encumbered by so many shadow liens, it is essentially radioactive." I sat down opposite him, bracing myself for the damage report. "How bad is it? How much did he mortgage the land for?" Harrison slid a densely printed summary sheet toward me. "The land is just the tip of the iceberg. Your father is not just experiencing a temporary cash flow problem, he is entirely insolvent." I pulled his shadow ledgers, tracking the offshore LLCs he set up under shell names in Delaware and Nevada. "Howard is currently carrying $5 million in toxic high-interest debt." $5 million, I repeated, the massive number echoing sharply in the quiet office. How does a man who runs a boutique investment firm accrue $5 million in bad debt without triggering federal bankruptcy flags? Because he did not borrow it from traditional regulated banks. Liam's voice came from the doorway. He walked in, locking the heavy office door behind him and joining us at the conference table. He leaned over my shoulder, his blue eyes rapidly scanning the financial documents. He went to the gray market. Hard money lenders. Predatory equity firms that charge loan shark interest rates and do not report to standard credit bureaus. Harrison tapped a specific transaction record with his silver pen. "Liam is exactly right. Howard has been taking out short-term, high-yield mezzanine loans for the past 18 months just to maintain the illusion of his wealth. The mortgage on their primary residence is completely underwater. The luxury cars are leased and 3 months behind on payments. But this right here is the masterpiece of his delusion." Harrison pointed to the staggering withdrawal made just 4 weeks ago. He took out a massive predatory loan at a 22% interest rate just to fund Brittany's engagement party. The ice sculptures, the imported caviar, the 100 elite guests, the designer gown, all of it was bought with dirty, high-interest cash. I stared at the numbers, the sheer scale of the financial insanity washing over me. They were standing on the edge of a cliff, pouring gasoline on themselves while complaining about the heat. Why would he take out a loan with those kinds of brutal terms just for a social event? It is absolute financial suicide. Because he viewed it as a high-stakes investment, Liam explained coldly, pulling up a leather chair next to me. He was not throwing a party. He was staging a highly produced theatrical performance for Richard Harrington. Howard was completely tapped out. He knew his creditors were circling, ready to strip his assets and publicly ruin him. He needed a massive corporate bailout. And Brittany's marriage to Spencer was his golden ticket. The dowry, I whispered, the sickening reality falling perfectly into place. He was expecting a massive financial injection from the Harrington family once the marriage became official. A signing bonus. A quiet transfer of funds from Richard to ensure his new daughter-in-law's family maintained their high society standing. He took out the bridge loans to fake his wealth until the Harrington money cleared his accounts. Precisely, Harrison confirmed. Howard was essentially running a family Ponzi scheme. He bet the entire estate, including the deed to your grandfather's valley land on Brittany, successfully marrying into a billionaire retail empire. He needed Richard Harrington's money to pay off the shadow lenders. But now that Liam has publicly killed the supply chain contract and Richard has canceled the wedding, Howard's exit strategy is completely annihilated. The lenders are calling in the debt. That is why he was panicking on the phone this morning. That is why they were crying in your lobby. By Monday morning, the creditors will seize his house, your valley property, and every single asset tied to his name. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the magnitude of the disaster. If the shadow lenders seized the valley land, my AgTech research station would be caught in a vicious legal crossfire. I could tie it up in probate court for years, arguing my grandfather's original intent, but the legal fees and operational delays would severely damage my company's momentum. I could not allow predatory lenders to freeze my most vital farming assets and lock out my scientists. Who holds the paper? I asked, looking directly at Liam. Who owns the actual debt? A private equity firm based in Chicago, Harrison answered. They are aggressive. They specialize in distressed assets and hostile liquidations. They will take no prisoners. I did not panic. I simply reached for the heavy brass pen on my desk and pulled my personal checkbook from the top drawer. I looked at Liam, a dangerous, calculated strategy, forming with absolute clarity in my mind. Liam, I said evenly, your holding company, Caldwell Financial, it operates a division that specializes in purchasing corporate debt, does it not? Liam's eyes darkened with immediate understanding. A sharp, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. It does. We buy distressed debt portfolios all the time. We can acquire debt notes in a matter of hours if the price is right. Good, I replied. I opened the checkbook and uncapped my pen. I want you to initiate a hostile buyout of my father's entire debt portfolio from that Chicago firm. Buy the $5 million note. Buy the mortgage on his house. Buy the liens against the valley land. Get all the paperwork transferred to your firm today. Harrison's eyebrows shot up in shock. Abigail, you do not have to pay his debts. You owe him nothing. Let him face the consequences of his own fraud. I am not paying off his debt, Harrison, I said, my voice dripping with absolute freezing precision. I began writing the figures on the check, the zeros flowing smoothly from the tip of the pen. Paying off his debt means he walks away free. I am not setting him free. I am buying the debt. I am acquiring the paper. I signed my name with a sharp, aggressive flourish and slid the multi-million-dollar check across the glass desk toward Liam. Transfer this to Caldwell Financial immediately, I instructed, my eyes locked onto Liam's. Execute the buyout before the markets close today. I do not want Howard to owe the bank. I do not want him to owe the shadow lenders. By 5 o'clock this evening, I want Howard and Linda to realize that they owe every single penny of their miserable, fraudulent existence directly to me. Liam picked up the check, his eyes gleaming with profound respect for the absolute ruthlessness of my move. I had just checkmated my own father on a board he did not even know we were playing on. I was no longer the disappointing daughter he could manipulate or dismiss. I was officially the sole owner of his estate, the master of his fate, and the most dangerous, unforgiving creditor of his ruined life. The confirmation from Caldwell Financial arrived via a secure courier exactly 4 hours later. A thick manila envelope was placed on my desk containing the transferred debt notes. I opened the file and ran my fingers over the stark black ink. It was official. Every predatory loan, every hidden line of credit, and the severely underwater mortgage on my parents' estate now belonged entirely to me. I owned the paper. I owned their debt. I owned them. Harrison reviewed the finalized transfers and gave a firm nod of approval. The trap was fully armed. All I had to do was wait for my father to step blindly into it. I did not have to wait long. The private line on my desk rang the following morning. I let it ring twice before picking up the receiver. Abigail Howard barked, his voice dripping with a toxic mixture of manufactured authority and thinly veiled panic. I hope you have spent the last 24 hours reflecting on your incredibly selfish behavior. You have put this entire family in a highly precarious position. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the debt portfolio sitting right in front of me. I am perfectly comfortable with my position, Howard. How is yours? He ignored the jab, plunging straight into his latest delusion. Richard Harrington is furious, but he is a businessman. He understands leverage. Spencer and Brittany are currently working on smoothing things over. But I need to finalize the liquidation of the Valley property to secure our liquidity. The commercial developer is still at the table, but he is losing patience. Howard actually thought he could still salvage his Ponzi scheme. He believed that if he could just force me to hand over the land, he could sell it to the developer, get the cash, pay off the shadow lenders he did not know I now controlled, and use whatever was left to buy his way back into the Harrington family's good graces. It was pathetic. The Valley Research Station is not yours to sell, I reminded him, my voice devoid of any emotion. You are a custodial trustee. You do not own the dirt, and you certainly do not own the multi-million-dollar agricultural facilities I built on top of it. I will not hesitate to tie your entire operation up in probate court for the next decade. Howard threatened, his tone turning vicious. I have already drafted the lawsuit. My attorneys are prepared to file a massive civil claim against you for undue influence. I will swear under oath that you manipulated your grandfather in his final days to secure that land. I will drag your pristine corporate reputation through the mud. I will subpoena your investors, your scientists, and your board of directors. I will freeze every single asset connected to that property until your company bleeds out and dies from legal fees. He paused, letting his extortion hang heavily in the air. He was attempting to weaponize the legal system to terrorize me into submission. It was a classic bully tactic. Create a massive, expensive problem and then offer to make it go away in exchange for total surrender. Or Howard continued, his voice slick with false benevolence. We can handle this quietly like a family. I had my lawyers draft a voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights. It is a simple quit-claim deed. You sign over your rights to the Valley land to me. In exchange, I will drop the lawsuit. I will leave your company alone. I will even ensure Spencer stops bothering your city permits. You walk away with your business intact, and I get the capital I need to secure your sister's wedding. It is a win for everyone. I looked at Harrison, who was listening silently from the conference table. He raised his eyebrows, silently mocking my father's absolute lack of self-awareness. Howard was offering to spare me from a financial crisis while I was currently holding the physical documentation of his total bankruptcy. You want me to sign away my grandfather's legacy so you can pay for Brittany's lifestyle, I clarified, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I want you to stop being a stubborn, ungrateful child and do your duty to this family, Howard snapped. Brittany is under an immense amount of stress right now. Richard Harrington is breathing down our necks. We need a unified front. I need that document signed today. I let a few seconds of heavy silence pass. I needed to set the stage for the final execution. I needed an audience. If I simply handed him the papers in my office, he would try to negotiate or manipulate his way out of the fallout. I wanted this to happen on his turf, surrounded by the very society he was destroying our family to impress. I will sign your document, Howard, I said, injecting just enough defeat into my voice to make him believe he had broken me. But I am not doing it in a lawyer's office, and I am not doing it over email. Where then, he demanded, suspicion warring with greed in his voice. Brittany's bridal shower is tomorrow afternoon at the country club, I stated. It was the truth. Despite the Harrington wedding hanging by a thread, Brittany had absolutely refused to cancel her lavish bridal shower. She was clinging to her high society fantasy with a terrifying level of denial, desperate to convince her wealthy friends that everything was perfectly fine. I will bring the signed relinquishment papers to the country club tomorrow, I promised. I will hand them directly to you in front of Brittany and Mom. If we are going to do this as a family, then we will do it with the whole family present. Howard let out a heavy sigh of relief. He actually thought he had won. He thought his intimidation tactics had crushed my resolve. See, Abigail Howard said, his tone instantly shifting back to that sickening, patronizing warmth. Was that so hard? I knew you would finally come to your senses and do the right thing. Just bring the papers to the country club tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Dress appropriately. We do not need you embarrassing your sister in front of her friends again. I will wear something unforgettable, I assured him. I pressed the button to end the call. I looked down at the massive stack of debt portfolios sitting on my desk. The shadow loans, the defaulted mortgages, the predatory credit lines. I stacked them neatly and slid them into a premium leather briefcase. Howard wanted a signed document to secure his family's future. I was going to give him one, but it was not going to be a relinquishment of my rights. It was going to be the absolute, undeniable termination of his. Harrison stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Are we ready for tomorrow? I snapped the leather briefcase shut, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet office. I looked out the glass walls at the thriving, high-tech agricultural empire I had built with my own 2 hands. We are going to a bridal shower, Harrison, I said, a cold, surgical smile forming on my face. Make sure you bring the foreclosure notices. I want to make sure my sister receives the perfect gift. The extravagant flagship salon of L'Etoile Bridal in Manhattan looked like the inside of a jewelry box. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors reflected the sparkle of imported crystal chandeliers, and the air was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive champagne. This was where the elite of the East Coast came to purchase garments that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Brittany had commandeered the entire VIP viewing suite for her bridal shower and final dress fitting. I stepped off the private elevator and walked down the plush carpeted hallway, gripping the handle of my leather briefcase. Through the open French doors of the viewing suite, I could hear the shrill, echoing laughter of my sister and her sycophantic bridesmaids. They were a flock of socialites clutching crystal flutes, sipping vintage champagne that my father was paying for with money he absolutely did not have. I stepped into the doorway and observed the spectacle. Brittany was standing on a circular velvet pedestal in the center of the room. She was wearing a custom hand-beaded lace gown with a cathedral-length train that pooled around her feet like spun sugar. It was a masterpiece of haute couture, carrying a staggering price tag of $100,000. Every single stitch was designed to scream wealth. My mother, Linda, sat on a tufted chaise lounge nearby, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief and soaking in the envious compliments of the surrounding women. Brittany caught my reflection in the massive wall mirror. Her laughter stopped abruptly. She turned around, her heavy diamond earrings swinging as she glared at me. Look who finally decided to join high society, Brittany announced, her voice dripping with venom and artificial sweetness. The bridesmaids turned in unison, raking their judging eyes over my tailored charcoal suit and flat leather loafers. I guess nobody informed you that this is a luxury bridal event, Abigail. You look like you are heading to a funeral or a boring corporate board meeting. Could you really not afford to hire a stylist for one afternoon? I stepped fully into the room, my expression remaining completely neutral. My attire is perfectly suited for the business I came here to conduct. Linda stood up, her face tight with a warning glare. She marched over, lowering her voice so the wealthy friends could not hear. You better have those papers signed, Abigail. Your father is waiting at his office for my confirmation. Give me the folder, and then stand in the back. Do not ruin this moment for your sister. Everyone who matters is in this room. I held my leather briefcase firmly at my side. I will hand over my documents when I am ready, Linda. Go back to your champagne. Brittany sighed loudly, rolling her eyes for the benefit of her audience. Oh, let her be, Mom. Abigail is just bitter because she will never wear a dress that costs 6 figures. She probably buys her clothes wholesale from a farm supply catalog. Do not let her ruin our vibe. The room erupted into polite, mocking laughter. Brittany preened under the attention. She gestured grandly to the boutique manager, a severe-looking woman in a black pantsuit holding a silver payment tray. Let us finalize this transaction, Brittany declared, her voice raised to ensure every socialite in the suite witnessed her purchasing power. The alterations are perfect, and I want the matching veil. Put the entire balance on my father's platinum card. Brittany reached into her designer clutch and pulled out Howard's sleek, heavy metal credit card. She tossed it onto the manager's silver tray with a flick of her wrist, treating the transaction with the casual arrogance of someone who had never worked a day in her life. "It is $100,000 just for the gown," Brittany boasted to a nearby bridesmaid, making sure her voice carried. But Daddy insisted. He said no price is too high for the future Mrs. Harrington. When you are marrying into a retail empire, you have to look the part. You simply cannot put a price tag on a legacy. The boutique manager offered a tight professional smile. "Right away, miss. I will process this at the terminal and bring your receipt." The manager walked over to the discreet payment station in the corner of the suite. Brittany went back to admiring her reflection, running her hands over the delicate lace and continuing to brag about her upcoming honeymoon in the Maldives. Linda poured herself another glass of champagne, shooting me a triumphant look, believing she had successfully bullied me into submission and secured her family's social standing. I stood quietly by the doorway watching the boutique manager insert the heavy metal card into the terminal. I counted the seconds in my head. The terminal beeped. It was not the soft, pleasant chime of an approved transaction. It was a sharp, harsh, repetitive tone. The manager frowned. She removed the card, wiped the chip on her sleeve, and inserted it again. Her manicured fingers tapped quickly on the screen. The harsh beep echoed again, cutting through the classical music playing softly in the background. Brittany stopped twirling on the pedestal. "What is taking so long?" she demanded, her tone laced with irritation. "Just run the card. I have a luncheon reservation at the plaza in 30 minutes and I hate being late." The manager looked up, her professional smile completely gone. Her face had turned rigid and uncomfortable. "I apologize, miss. There seems to be an issue with the payment method." Brittany let out an exasperated huff. "What kind of issue? Your machine must be broken. That is an unlimited platinum account." "Run it again. I ran it 3 times." "Miss," the manager replied, her voice dropping into a discreet whisper as she walked back toward the pedestal. "The terminal is returning a specific error code. The card is declined." The word hung in the air, freezing the entire room. The bridesmaid stopped whispering. Linda froze with her champagne glass halfway to her lips. "Declined," Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking in pure, unadulterated panic. "That is impossible. My father is a multi-millionaire. Call your bank immediately." The manager shook her head, holding the metal card out on the silver tray like it was a contaminated object. "It is not an error on our end, miss. The terminal clearly states that this account has been frozen and seized by a private debt collection firm. All lines of credit associated with this name have been permanently revoked." I watched the color completely drain from Brittany's face. Her knees buckled slightly under the weight of the $100,000 dress she could no longer afford. Linda dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the plush carpet. She lunged forward, grabbing the card from the tray. "There has to be a mistake. Run my card. Run my personal account right now." Linda pulled her own gold card from her purse and shoved it at the manager. The woman sighed, walked back to the terminal, and swiped it. A sharp beep rang out again. "Declined." The manager stated flatly, her patience evaporating. "The error code is identical. Your personal accounts have also been frozen. I am sorry, but if you cannot provide a valid form of payment, I must ask you to step off the pedestal and remove the gown immediately. We do not extend credit." Brittany let out a horrified, breathless gasp. Her wealthy friends were exchanging wide-eyed, shocked glances, already stepping away from her, as if poverty were a contagious disease. The illusion of the untouchable socialite was disintegrating in real time. I tightened my grip on the leather briefcase, watching them drown in their own humiliation. The trap had slammed shut. I stepped forward, breaking my silence as the panic in the room reached a fever pitch. Linda spun around to face me, her eyes wide and wild like a cornered animal. "Abigail." Linda gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the boutique manager. "Pay for this. Use your corporate account. Use whatever Liam gave you. Do it right now, and I swear I will make sure your father leaves your research station alone. Just fix this embarrassment." I did not reach for my wallet. Instead, I walked directly to the center of the VIP suite and placed my heavy leather briefcase onto the glass and gold tea table. The metallic snap of the latches opening echoed loudly, drawing the eyes of every single person in the room. The bridesmaids clutched their champagne flutes, completely captivated by the unfolding disaster. I brought the paperwork Howard requested. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. But I am not paying for a single thread of that dress, Linda. You cannot afford it, and neither can the man you married. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the thick, red tabbed folder Harrison had prepared for me. I did not hand it to my mother. I slammed it down onto the glass tea table with a resounding thud. Linda scoffed, trying to regain her composure in front of the wealthy onlookers. Is this the relinquishment deed? Excellent. You finally did something useful for this family. I will call your father right now and tell him the Valley land is secured. He can call his bank and clear up this ridiculous technical glitch. It is not a technical glitch, Linda, I said, leaning over the table and tapping a manicured finger against the bold, black text printed on the very first page. And that is not a relinquishment deed. I suggest you read the header before you make any phone calls. Linda frowned, leaning in to look at the document. Her eyes scanned the legal phrasing, and I watched the exact second her brain processed the words. Her jaw dropped. Her hands began to shake so violently she had to grip the edge of the glass table to keep from collapsing. Asset freeze order. I read aloud, ensuring my voice carried to the back of the room where Brittany was frozen on the pedestal. Issued by the State Supreme Court this morning, effective immediately. What is this? Brittany demanded, her voice cracking as she clutched the skirt of the expensive gown. What did you do to my father's accounts? I did nothing to his accounts, I replied, turning my gaze to my sister. Howard did this to himself. He has been funding your fake luxury lifestyle with toxic predatory loans for the past 18 months. Your engagement party, your designer shoes, the lease on his cars, the mortgage on your childhood home. All of it was paid for with gray market cash at loan shark interest rates. He has racked up $5 million in high-yield debt, betting everything on the assumption that marrying you off to Spencer would result in a massive financial bailout from the Harrington family. A collective gasp swept through the room. The bridesmaids who just minutes ago had been fawning over Brittany were now looking at her with absolute disgust. In their world, there was nothing more vulgar than fake wealth. They began whispering to each other, their voices sharp and mocking. $5 million, one bridesmaid muttered to another. They are completely broke. She is just a scammer. That is a lie, Brittany screamed, tears of pure rage and panic spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her makeup. My father is an investment banker. He is rich. You are just making this up to ruin my wedding. He is a fraud, I corrected her sharply. And the shadow lenders he borrowed from called in his debt this morning. They were going to liquidate everything. The house, the cars, and the deed to my grandfather's land. They were going to leave you on the street. Linda looked up at me, her face pale and shining with cold sweat. If the lenders froze the accounts, why does this court order have your company's legal header on it? A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had just delivered the final fatal blow. Because I bought the debt, Linda. I announced, the reality of my words crashing down on them like a concrete vault. Through Caldwell Financial, I initiated a hostile buyout of Howard's entire debt portfolio. I bought the $5 million note. I bought the mortgage on your house. I own every single line of credit attached to your name. I am your sole creditor, and I was the one who instructed my legal team to freeze your accounts an hour ago. You have absolutely nothing left, and you owe every single penny of your miserable existence directly to me. The silence that followed was absolute perfection. I watched decades of their arrogance and cruelty evaporate into total financial ruin. They were completely at my mercy, and I had absolutely none to give. Take it off, the boutique manager suddenly snapped, her professional demeanor entirely gone. She marched toward the pedestal, pointing a stern finger at Brittany. You are sweating on a $100,000 silk gown that you cannot pay for. Take it off right now before I call the police and have you arrested for attempted theft. Brittany let out a guttural, ear-piercing scream. It was not a cry of sadness. It was the sound of a spoiled, entitled child, realizing her entire universe had just collapsed. She dropped to her knees right there on the velvet pedestal, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. She tore at her own hair, her manicured nails snagging in the elaborate styling that had taken hours to perfect. Her wealthy friends did not rush to comfort her. They backed away toward the exit, grabbing their purses and whispering urgently to each other. They were abandoning a sinking ship, eager to distance themselves from the biggest social scandal of the season. Brittany was thrashing on the floor, weeping and screaming my name, like a curse, completely losing her mind in front of the very people she had spent her life trying to impress. Linda was frozen, staring blankly at the court order on the table, as if it were a death sentence. Then the heavy brass handle of the viewing suite's double doors turned. The doors swung open with a forceful, heavy push. The remaining bridesmaids scrambled out of the way. Richard Harrington stepped into the room. He was wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit, but his face was carved out of pure stone. His eyes swept over the pathetic scene. He looked at Linda, paralyzed by the table, at Brittany, thrashing and weeping on the floor in an unpaid dress, and finally at me, standing tall by the briefcase. His expression was completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. His arrival signaled that the nightmare for my family had only just begun. Richard Harrington stood in the doorway of the VIP suite, his presence completely freezing the air in the room. He did not look at the fleeing bridesmaids or the boutique manager who was clutching the declined credit card. His cold, calculating eyes swept over the pathetic scene before him, taking in my mother paralyzed by the glass table and my sister weeping on the floor in a $100,000 gown she could not afford. Finally, his gaze locked onto me. He looked at the leather briefcase, the red-tabbed folders, and the asset freeze order sitting on the table. A flicker of dark, begrudging respect crossed his rigid features. He understood exactly what I had done. I had executed a financial slaughter that his own corporate raiders would have been proud of. Richard stepped fully into the room, followed closely by a tall, sharply dressed man, clutching a thick legal portfolio. It was his lead family trust attorney. "Richard," my mother gasped, her voice trembling as she practically threw herself toward him, desperate to salvage the illusion. "Please, you have to understand, Abigail is just playing a cruel prank. Howard had a minor banking error. It is a simple misunderstanding." "Do not insult my intelligence, Linda," Richard barked, his voice echoing off the mirrored walls like a whip cracking. "My financial intelligence team just finished auditing your husband's shadow ledgers. I know about the mezzanine loans. I know about the 22% interest rates. I know that your entire luxurious life is a house of cards built on predatory debt. And I know that Abigail just bought that debt, which means you do not possess a single cent to your name." Linda recoiled as if she had been physically struck. She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. The absolute finality in Richard's voice crushed her last remaining delusion. Brittany scrambled to her feet, the heavy cathedral train of the unpaid wedding gown dragging awkwardly behind her. She stumbled toward Richard, her face a smeared, tear-stained mess. "Mr. Harrington, please," Brittany sobbed, reaching out her hands in a desperate plea. "I had no idea what my father was doing. I swear to you, I love Spencer. You cannot cancel the wedding. I have the invitations sent. The country club is booked. I will be ruined." Richard looked at my sister with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "If it were entirely up to me, you and your fraudulent family would never step foot near my son again," he stated coldly. "Spencer is an arrogant fool who nearly destroyed our supply chain because he let you manipulate him." However, the media fallout of a canceled high society wedding right after a major stock market hit would cause an unacceptable level of turbulence for my shareholders. He gestured sharply to his attorney. The lawyer stepped forward, opened his portfolio, and dropped a massive, heavily bound legal document right onto the glass tea table. It landed with a heavy smack, sitting directly next to my asset freeze order. "The wedding will proceed," Richard announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. "But the terms of your entry into my family have drastically changed." "What is this?" Brittany whispered, staring at the thick stack of paper as if it were a venomous snake. "That is your new prenuptial agreement," Richard declared. "The previous contract we drafted was generous because I was under the false impression that your father was a successful investment banker bringing equal social equity to the table. I now know he is a bankrupt fraud hoping to use my wealth to pay off his loan sharks. That ends right here." Richard tapped the document with a heavy gold pen he pulled from his jacket pocket. I will outline the terms for you clearly so there is no confusion. You will sign away any and all rights to Harrington retail stock, liquid assets, and real estate properties. If this marriage dissolves for any reason, you will receive zero spousal support and zero alimony. You will not receive a single dollar of Harrington money. Brittany gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. You cannot do that. That leaves me with nothing. You already have nothing, Richard reminded her ruthlessly. He continued detailing the draconian terms. Furthermore, your personal allowance will be strictly monitored by my family office. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. If you ever speak to the press about my family, my business, or this contract, you will be sued for $50 million. And finally, there is an ironclad clause regarding your father. Howard is permanently barred from requesting, receiving, or borrowing any capital from the Harrington estate. If you attempt to funnel my money to pay off the debts he owes Abigail, the marriage is instantly voided, and you are cast out with the clothes on your back. The sheer brutality of the contract was breathtaking. Richard was not just protecting his assets, he was locking Brittany into a gilded cage. He was stripping away her voice, her agency, and her financial independence. She would be nothing more than a silent, obedient prop for society photos, trapped in a marriage with a man who already resented her. You have exactly two choices, Brittany, Richard stated, uncapping the gold pen and holding it out to her. You can take this pen, sign every single page on this table right now, and become Mrs. Spencer Harrington under my absolute control. Or you can refuse, and I will call the press corps waiting outside my office. I will tell them the wedding is canceled because your family is a gang of bankrupt fraudsters. You will leave this boutique with no money, no home, and a ruined reputation. Choose. Brittany stared at the pen, her entire body shaking violently. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading terror. She wanted me to save her. She wanted the sister she had mocked and humiliated for years to step in and fix the nightmare she had created for herself. I simply stared back, offering nothing but cold, silent observation. Sign it, Brittany, Linda hissed suddenly, grabbing her daughter's arm with a frantic, bruising grip. Mom, I cannot! Brittany wept, shaking her head. It leaves me with nothing. He owns me. We have no house. Linda whispered harshly, her voice cracking with pure panic. Your father's accounts are frozen. If you do not marry Spencer, we will be living in a homeless shelter by Monday. Sign the paper. You are marrying a billionaire. We will figure the rest out later. Just sign it. Linda's delusion was staggering. She actually believed they could still outsmart Richard Harrington once the ring was on Brittany's finger. She was willingly pushing her favorite daughter into a lifetime of financial imprisonment just to maintain the illusion of their social status. Brittany let out a broken, defeated sob. She stepped off the velvet pedestal. The boutique manager gasped and shouted a warning as the hem of the $100,000 dress caught under Brittany's heel, tearing a delicate strip of custom lace. Brittany did not even notice. She walked slowly to the glass table, moving like a prisoner approaching the execution block. She took the gold pen from Richard's hand. Her fingers trembled so badly she could barely hold it steady. Tears dripped from her chin, splashing onto the crisp legal paper and smudging the dark ink as she began to sign her name. She signed page after page, her soft sobs echoing in the dead silence of the VIP suite. Every signature stripped away another layer of her arrogance, her pride, and her future. She was trading her basic human dignity for a last name she could not even afford to carry. When she finally signed the last page, the pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the glass. She collapsed back onto the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, burying her face in the ruined layers of the unpaid wedding gown. She wept with the raw, agonizing realization that her fairy tale was actually a life sentence. Richard did not offer a single word of comfort. He picked up the signed prenuptial agreement, checked the signatures with clinical precision, and handed the document back to his attorney. He turned toward the exit, pausing just for a second, when he reached my side. He looked at me, a silent, grim acknowledgement passing between us. We both knew exactly what had just happened. We had successfully cornered the parasites. I will see you at the wedding, Abigail. Richard said quietly, before walking out the double doors, leaving my mother and sister trapped in the ruins of their own making. The wedding day arrived 2 weeks later under a sky of mocking, cloudless blue. The Harrington estate had spared no expense transforming the historic country club into a floral wonderland, but the atmosphere inside the grand ballroom was suffocatingly toxic. It was a masterclass in hollow pageantry. The entire event felt less like a celebration of love and more like a highly orchestrated hostage exchange. Howard and Linda were practically vibrating with nervous energy. They had spent the last 14 days dodging aggressive process servers and ignoring eviction warnings, surviving entirely on the fumes of a shattered illusion. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, flashing stiff, desperate smiles at the wealthy guests, pretending their empire was not currently sitting in a heavy leather briefcase in my office. They were banking absolutely everything on this single afternoon. They were desperately hoping the traditional envelopes of cash and generous wedding gifts from the elite attendees would be enough to secure a modest rental apartment once the shadow lenders officially seized their home on Monday morning. I walked into the country club with my hand resting lightly on Liam's arm. The moment we stepped into the grand foyer, the whispers began. The high society crowd had heard the rumors. In their circles, financial ruin was the ultimate scandal, and the stench of my father's bankruptcy was impossible to hide. The Harrington family had positioned themselves on the far side of the ballroom, forming an impenetrable wall of wealth and power. Richard Harrington held court among his peers, occasionally shooting icy, disdainful glares across the room at my parents. Spencer stood near the altar, refusing to even look toward the bridal preparation wing. He looked like a man preparing for a prison sentence, trapped by his father's ruthless corporate damage control. I was sipping a glass of sparkling water near the back terrace when a frantic wedding coordinator rushed up to me, her headset buzzing with panicked chatter. She looked completely frazzled. "Miss," the coordinator whispered urgently, looking around to ensure no guests were listening. "Your mother requested your presence in the bridal preparation suite immediately. She said it is an absolute emergency." Liam narrowed his eyes instinctively, stepping closer to me. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked, his voice low and protective. "No," I replied calmly, handing him my glass. "Stay here. If they are staging an emergency right before the ceremony, it means they have finally run out of options. Let me hear what they have to say." I walked down the long carpeted corridor leading to the private bridal wing. The air grew heavier with every step. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door to the preparation suite and stepped inside. The room was a disaster zone of discarded tissue paper, spilled makeup powder, and half-empty champagne flutes. The bridesmaids had clearly been dismissed. Brittany sat slumped in a velvet chair in the corner, staring blankly at the wall. She was wearing the $100,000 gown, the torn lace carefully pinned and hidden by the seamstress. She looked completely hollowed out, a ghost trapped inside layers of expensive silk. Before I could even speak, my mother lunged across the room. Linda did not just approach me. She practically tackled me. Her hands, trembling violently, shot out and grabbed the lapels of my tailored blazer. Her manicured nails dug into the fabric with a terrifying, bruising grip. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic, her expensive makeup ruined by streams of dark, muddy tears. "Abigail, please," Linda sobbed, her voice a ragged, breathless wheeze. "You have to save us. You have to do it right now." I stood perfectly still, letting her clutch my jacket, my expression completely impassive. "Take your hands off me, Linda." She did not let go. She only gripped the fabric tighter, dropping to her knees right in front of me, dragging my blazer down with her weight. It was a pathetic, horrifying display. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had spent my entire life calling me a failure was now weeping on the floor of a country club, begging for mercy. "I do not care about the house anymore." Linda wept, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. "I do not care about the cars or the country club memberships. You can keep all the debt. You can keep the Valley land, but you have to call Liam right now. You have to make him wire $2 million to your father's offshore account before the ceremony begins." I looked down at her, genuine confusion piercing through my cold facade. "You are completely delusional. I already bought the $5 million debt. Liam is not wiring you a single cent. Why do you need $2 million in cash right now? Because he is going to prison, Brittany suddenly shrieked from the corner. I turned to look at my sister. She was clutching her veil, her eyes wide with terror. Brittany scrambled out of her chair, the heavy gown dragging across the floor as she rushed over to stand next to our sobbing mother. The shadow lenders were not his only problem, Brittany confessed, her voice shaking uncontrollably. When Howard realized he could not pay the interest on the mezzanine loans, he panicked. He started forging client signatures at his investment firm. He illegally liquidated $2 million from his clients' retirement portfolios to cover the interest payments and fund this wedding. He embezzled the money, Abigail. The sheer magnitude of the crime hit me like a physical blow. My father had not just made bad investments, he had not just borrowed from loan sharks. He had actively stolen millions from innocent people who trusted him with their life savings. The federal auditors arrived at his office this morning. Linda cried, burying her face against my knees. They are reviewing the ledgers right now. If they find the missing $2 million, they are going to hand the case over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Howard will be arrested for wire fraud and embezzlement by Monday morning. He will spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Linda looked up at me, her eyes completely wild, her hands still clutching my clothes in a death grip. You have the power to stop this. Liam can wire the money to cover the stolen funds before the auditors finish their review. You have to ask him to bail us out. If you do not get us that cash immediately, your father will die behind bars. Please, Abigail, you are our only hope. Save him. I stared down at the woman begging at my feet, realizing the true depth of the depravity I had been dealing with my entire life. They were not just toxic parents. They were actual criminals, and they expected me to become their accomplice. I reached down and grabbed my mother by the wrists. I pried her manicured fingers off my tailored blazer one by one, using just enough force to make my physical boundaries undeniably clear. I stepped back, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of my jacket with slow, deliberate precision. I looked down at her tear-streaked face with absolute disgust. You expect me to wire $2 million of Liam's money to cover your federal embezzlement charges? I asked, my voice ringing with freezing clarity in the bridal suite. You want me to become an accessory to wire fraud just to save you from a prison sentence you entirely deserve? Before Linda could launch into another pathetic round of sobbing, the heavy mahogany door of the preparation suite swung open. My father Howard stepped inside. He was sweating profusely, his face flushed a dangerous, unhealthy shade of crimson. Right behind him was Spencer Harrington, looking surprisingly smug for a man whose father had just publicly threatened to terminate his corporate position. Howard slammed the door shut and quickly engaged the deadbolt sealing us inside the room. Howard took one look at his wife groveling on the floor and realized his strategy of begging had completely failed. His desperation instantly hardened into pure malice. Get up, Linda, Howard snapped, his voice rough and aggressive. He turned his attention to me, his chest heaving as he tried to regain his false authority. I told you she would not help us out of the goodness of her heart. We have to do this the hard way. Spencer stepped forward, completely unbothered by the sheer panic radiating from my parents. He walked over to the vanity table, picked up a half-empty bottle of champagne, and poured himself a fresh glass. He took a casual sip, flashing me a predatory, arrogant smile. Your father and I have a mutual understanding, Abigail, Spencer said smoothly, treating this extortion like a casual boardroom negotiation. When my father humiliated me and threatened to cut off my trust fund, I realized I needed my own independent safety net. Your father needed massive amounts of cash to pay off his shadow lenders, so we collaborated. Spencer paced slowly across the room, enjoying the sound of his own voice. 3 months ago, Howard and I established an offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The plan was brilliant. Once Brittany and I were officially married, I would have access to the Harrington family investment portfolios. I was going to approve massive consulting contracts, funneling millions of dollars from my father's retail empire directly into our offshore shell company under the guise of agricultural supply chain management. Howard would get his cut to pay off his debts, and I would build my own private fortune away from my father's controlling grip. I stared at him, genuinely astounded by his stupidity. You planned to embezzle from Richard Harrington right under his nose. Your father is a ruthless billionaire. He would have caught you before the ink dried on the wire transfers. He will not catch anything if the money never moves. Howard interrupted, taking a threatening step toward me. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. But the federal auditors sitting in my office right now are a different story. They are tracing the $2 million I already liquidated from my clients to keep my lenders at bay. When they find that missing money, they are going to demand answers. Howard leaned in close, his breath reeking of stale coffee and fear. And when they look for the paper trail, they are going to find a highly sophisticated labyrinth of false invoices, a trail that Spencer and I carefully constructed over the past 90 days. And guess where that paper trail leads? Spencer chimed in, his smile widening into a wicked grin. It leads directly to your ag-tech startup, Abigail. A cold chill washed over the room. Brittany gasped from her velvet chair, finally understanding the depth of the conspiracy happening right in front of her. She realized her fiancé and her father were attempting to destroy her sister to save themselves. We fabricated purchase orders, Spencer explained thoroughly, enjoying his moment of perceived triumph. We falsified vendor contracts. We even routed encrypted emails using IP addresses that bounce right back to your corporate headquarters. We made it look like the missing $2 million was funneled into your company as illegal seed funding. If those federal auditors alert the FBI today, the very first place they will raid is your pristine greenhouse facility. Howard crossed his arms, regaining his arrogant posture now that the trap was laid bare. They will seize your servers, Abigail. They will freeze your operating accounts. You will be indicted for federal racketeering. And since you are now publicly linked to Liam Caldwell, the Securities and Exchange Commission will drag Caldwell Agronomics right into the center of a massive federal investigation. You will trigger a total collapse of Liam's stock value. You will destroy his empire. Spencer stepped up right next to my father, crossing his arms in a matching pose of arrogance. So here is your ultimatum, Abigail. You are going to walk out of this room, find Liam, and have him wire $2 million into my offshore account before my wedding ceremony starts in exactly 20 minutes. You cover Howard's missing funds, the auditors find a balanced ledger, and I destroy the fake paper trail connecting you to our shell company. You refuse, and we burn your life's work to ash. We take you and your billionaire boyfriend down with us. The audacity of their blackmail was staggering. They were cornered rats resorting to blatant documented extortion to save themselves from federal prison. They actually believed they had outsmarted me. They thought backing me into a corner and threatening my company would force my absolute compliance. They severely underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I felt the smooth, cold metal of my smartphone securely tucked inside the interior pocket of my blazer. The voice recording application I had activated before entering the suite was still running perfectly. It was capturing every single syllable of their federal blackmail scheme, crystal clear and undeniable. They had just handed me their own signed death warrants on a silver platter. I did not scream. I did not argue. I did not try to negotiate or defend my innocence. I simply stared at them, my face an unreadable mask of absolute chilling calm. I let the silence stretch heavy and suffocating, making them wait for a frantic reaction that was never going to come. I looked at Linda, trembling on the floor. I looked at Brittany, shaking in her ruined dress. I looked at Howard and Spencer, two arrogant criminals utterly convinced of their own victory. I turned on my heel. I walked directly to the heavy mahogany door, unlocked the deadbolt with a sharp click, and pulled the door wide open. "Where are you going?" Linda cried out from the floor, her voice frantic with renewed panic. I stepped out into the carpeted hallway and pulled the heavy door shut behind me, not uttering a single word. As the door clicked shut, I heard Spencer let out a loud, triumphant laugh from inside the suite. "Relax," Spencer told my parents, his voice dripping with arrogant certainty. "She is going to get the money. We have her completely trapped." I did not walk toward the main ballroom to find Liam. I bypassed the crowded guest areas entirely and moved with swift, silent purpose down the restricted service corridor leading to the country club's grand chapel. The ornate vaulted sanctuary was already filling with hundreds of elite guests, but I was not interested in finding a seat just yet. I was looking for the audiovisual control room. I found it nestled in a small, shadowed balcony overlooking the altar. A young sound technician was adjusting the equalizer levels on a massive mixing board, preparing the microphones for the officiant and cueing up the traditional bridal march. I walked into the booth, locking the heavy acoustic door behind me. I pulled out my smartphone and a thick stack of $100 bills from my emergency cash reserve. I placed the money directly onto his soundboard. I told him I needed his auxiliary cable and his absolute silence for the next 20 minutes. He looked at the cash, then up at my cold, unyielding expression, and wisely scooped up the money. He handed over the cable and stepped out of the booth, entirely leaving me in total control of the chapel's sound system. I plugged my phone directly into the master channel. I queued up the voice memo I had just recorded in the bridal suite, sliding the volume fader to maximum. I activated a remote Bluetooth trigger synced to my device, ensuring I could control the playback from anywhere in the room. Then I walked out of the booth and slipped into the back row of the chapel, just as the final guests were taking their seats. Liam found me a moment later. He slid into the wooden pew beside me, his large, grounding presence immediately calming my racing pulse. He leaned close, his voice a low whisper barely audible over the hushed chatter of the high society crowd. "Are we paying them?" Liam asked, his eyes scanning the room. I shook my head, keeping my gaze fixed straight ahead on the altar. "No," I replied evenly. "We are destroying them." Liam smiled a dark, predatory smile and sat back, crossing his arms to watch the show. Down in the front row, Richard Harrington sat rigid and furious. He was radiating open hostility, clearly despising every single second of this forced matrimonial merger. He maintained the rigid posture of a corporate titan, protecting his stock price, but his jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. The heavy oak doors at the front of the chapel swung shut. The polite chatter of the crowd hushed to a respectful, expectant silence. Spencer emerged from the side room and took his place at the altar. He smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, flashing a smug, victorious grin. He scanned the crowd, his eyes sweeping over the rows until they caught mine in the very back. His smile widened into a look of absolute arrogant triumph. He actually thought my presence meant I had surrendered. He genuinely believed I had just authorized a $2 million wire transfer to secure his offshore shell company and save my father from prison. He had no idea he was currently standing directly on top of a landmine. The massive double doors at the entrance of the chapel swung wide open. The congregation stood up in unison. Brittany stood in the threshold, her face veiled with expensive lace, clutching a bouquet of white orchids with trembling hands. Howard stood beside her, his chest puffed out, playing the role of the proud, successful patriarch perfectly. They paused, waiting for the traditional sweeping chords of the bridal chorus to signal their grand entrance. I reached into my pocket and grasped my remote trigger. I did not hesitate. I pressed play. The majestic acoustics of the vaulted chapel did not fill with the elegant swell of a string quartet. Instead, a sharp burst of static crackled through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, immediately followed by the unmistakable, arrogant voice of Spencer Harrington. The audio quality was pristine. The acoustics amplified his extortion to concert hall levels, wrapping every single syllable around the horrified guests. "Your father and I have a mutual understanding, Abigail." Spencer's recorded voice boomed from the hidden speakers, echoing off the stained glass windows. "When my father humiliated me and threatened to cut off my trust fund, I realized I needed my own independent safety net. Your father needed massive amounts of cash to pay off his shadow lenders. So we collaborated." A collective deafening gasp ripped through the chapel. The wealthy guests froze in their pews, turning their heads in wild confusion. At the altar, the smug grin instantly melted off Spencer's face, replaced by a mask of sheer, paralyzing terror. He whipped his head around, frantically searching the vaulted ceilings for the source of the audio, but the sound booth remained completely dark and locked. In the doorway, Brittany stumbled backward in her heavy gown. Howard dropped his daughter's arm, his face draining of all blood as his own desperate voice suddenly thundered through the chapel speakers. "The federal auditors sitting in my office right now are a different story." Howard's frantic recorded voice declared loudly to the entire congregation. They are tracing the $2 million I already liquidated from my clients to keep my lenders at bay. When they find that missing money, they are going to demand answers. Pandemonium erupted in the pews. Investment bankers, socialites, and politicians began whispering frantically, instantly recognizing the unforced confession of a massive federal felony. But the recording was not finished. It drove the blade even deeper, exposing the exact clinical mechanics of their betrayal. Once Brittany and I were officially married, I would have access to the Harrington family investment portfolios. Spencer's recorded voice bragged, his words dripping with unearned, sickening arrogance. I was going to approve massive consulting contracts, funneling millions of dollars from my father's retail empire directly into our offshore shell company under the guise of agricultural supply chain management. Howard would get his cut to pay off his debts, and I would build my own private fortune away from my father's controlling grip. I shifted my gaze to the front row. Richard Harrington was standing perfectly still. The billionaire retail magnate looked like a statue carved from solid ice. Every single muscle in his body was coiled with a lethal volcanic tension. He was not just embarrassed by a ruined wedding. He was listening to his own flesh and blood outline a meticulous, premeditated plan to gut the Harrington legacy from the inside out. He heard Spencer explicitly detail how he intended to rob his own father blind the second the wedding rings were exchanged, all with the enthusiastic help of a bankrupt embezzling father-in-law. The final syllable of the recording echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the chapel, hanging in the air for one terrible defining second before the audio feed cut out completely. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was the suffocating, highly pressurized stillness of a bomb that had just detonated in a crowded room. Down in the front row, Richard Harrington finally moved. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms or make a frantic scene. He simply stepped out of the wooden pew and began to walk up the center aisle toward the altar. His pace was slow, measured, and unspeakably lethal. The wealthy guests seated along the aisle physically recoiled as he passed, pressing themselves back against the wooden benches to avoid being anywhere near the blast radius of his fury. He looked like an apex predator zeroing in on a trapped, bleeding animal. Up on the altar, Spencer was shaking so violently, his custom tuxedo jacket visibly vibrated. The arrogant smirk that had defined his entire existence was completely erased, replaced by the pale, wide-eyed terror of a man who realized he was about to be buried alive. "Dad," Spencer stammered, holding his hands up defensively as his father ascended the marble steps of the altar. "Dad, listen to me. That recording is doctored. It is a fake. Abigail engineered that audio to frame me because she is trying to extort us. You have to believe me." Richard Harrington did not slow his pace. He did not say a single word. He closed the remaining distance between them, raised his right hand, and struck his son across the face with everything he had. The slap sounded like a gunshot. The sheer force of the impact snapped Spencer's head to the side and sent him crashing backward. He tripped over the hem of the altar rug, sprawling awkwardly onto the polished marble floor. A sharp collective gasp ripped through the congregation, but nobody dared to intervene. Spencer lay on the ground, clutching his rapidly bruising jaw, staring up at his father in absolute whimpering shock. "You parasitic, incompetent coward," Richard hissed, his voice vibrating with a cold, controlled rage that commanded the entire chapel. "You thought you could bleed my company dry. You thought you possessed the intellect to outmaneuver me and set up offshore shell accounts using my capital. You do not even have the business acumen to successfully manage a grocery aisle, let alone orchestrate international corporate espionage." "Dad, please, I am sorry," Spencer begged, scrambling backward on his hands and knees like a terrified child. "I was just stressed. Howard pressured me into it. He said he needed the cash to save his family. I never actually transferred any money." Richard stood over him, looking down with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are a liability. As of this exact second, you are permanently terminated from your position on the board of directors. Your corporate access cards are deactivated. Your trust fund is entirely liquidated to cover the market capitalization damages you caused this morning." You are no longer an employee of Harrington Retail, and you are no longer my son. Get out of my sight before I have my security team throw you into the street." Richard turned his back on his son, completely dismissing his existence. He stepped up to the edge of the altar and faced the hundreds of paralyzed guests. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping past the terrified socialites and paralyzed investment bankers, until his gaze locked directly onto Howard, who was still standing paralyzed in the doorway. "This wedding is permanently canceled," Richard announced, his voice booming across the silent chapel. "I advise every single one of you to leave this venue immediately. The Harrington family will no longer associate with these fraudulent criminals, and anyone who continues to do business with Howard or his associates will be permanently blacklisted from my corporate network." The chapel erupted into instant, frantic chaos. The wealthy elite did not need to be told twice. In high society, associating with a bankrupt federal criminal was professional suicide. The guests scrambled out of their pews, grabbing their designer purses and expensive coats, practically shoving each other out of the way to reach the side exits. They wanted to put as much physical distance between themselves and my family as humanly possible. Richard pulled a sleek mobile phone from his jacket pocket. He did not lower his voice as he dialed his lead corporate counsel. "Get the federal financial authorities on the line right now," Richard ordered into the phone, his eyes still locked onto my father at the back of the room. "I want an active criminal investigation launched into Spencer Harrington and Howard for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted embezzlement. Hand over all internal email server logs and financial communications immediately. I want them both behind bars by Monday." At the entrance of the chapel, Howard physically collapsed against the heavy wooden doors. His face was a sickly grayish white. He clutched his chest, struggling to breathe as the reality of a federal prison sentence crashed down upon him. He had spent his entire life manipulating numbers, stepping on his family, and sacrificing his own daughter just to project the illusion of wealth. Now he was going to lose his freedom entirely. Beside him, Linda was completely catatonic. She stood frozen in her expensive mother-of-the-bride dress, her eyes glassy and vacant, unable to process the fact that she was going from a country club to absolute destitution in a matter of seconds. But it was Brittany who provided the final tragic spectacle. She stood alone in the center of the main aisle, abandoned by the fleeing guests, abandoned by her fleeing bridesmaids, and abandoned by the man she had sold her soul to marry. The sheer weight of the catastrophe finally shattered her fragile, delusional reality. She let out a guttural, heartbroken wail that echoed painfully through the emptying church. Her knees buckled beneath her. She crashed down onto the hard floor, the heavy $100,000 cathedral train pooling around her like a pristine white cage. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with violent sobs, completely ruined by her own toxic vanity. I stood in the back row, watching the destruction unfold with absolute chilling clarity. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or guilt. I had simply held up a mirror, and they had destroyed themselves with their own reflections. Liam gently placed his hand on my lower back. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The battle was over, and the victory was absolute. I slipped my hand into his, my fingers intertwining with the man who had stood by me when I had nothing, the man they had mocked, the man who had helped me burn their poisonous empire to the ground. We turned our backs on the screaming, the weeping, and the ruins of my family. Without making a sound, we walked out through the heavy chapel doors, leaving them trapped in the darkness they had created, and stepped forward into the bright, unburdened sunlight of my new life. 1 month later, the dust had finally settled over the smoldering crater that used to be my family's legacy. The fallout was not just swift, it was absolute. When you cross a billionaire retail magnate and hand the federal authorities a recorded confession of embezzlement on a silver platter, the justice system moves with terrifying, relentless efficiency. Howard's downfall began exactly 48 hours after the chapel doors closed. It was not a quiet, dignified surrender. Early Tuesday morning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided his boutique investment firm. Dozens of agents swarmed the glass lobby, locking down the building and seizing every hard drive server and filing cabinet they could find. Employees and clients watched in stunned silence as my father was led out of his own headquarters in handcuffs. His expensive tailored suit was wrinkled, and his face was pale with sheer terror as he was marched past the flashing cameras of local news reporters. The Securities and Exchange Commission immediately froze every single asset tied to his name. During his arraignment, the judge denied bail, deeming him a severe flight risk due to the offshore shell companies Spencer had so helpfully detailed on the church speakers. Howard was remanded to a federal detention center, trading his luxury lifestyle for a concrete cell awaiting a trial that would undoubtedly end in a multi-decade prison sentence for wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. With Howard incarcerated and his account seized by the federal government, the illusion of my mother and sister's wealth evaporated overnight. I did not delay the foreclosure process. As the sole owner of their massive debt portfolio, I instructed Harrison to execute the eviction notice with brutal surgical precision. On a rainy Thursday morning, county sheriffs arrived at the sprawling suburban estate my parents had spent years using to project their fake superiority. Linda and Brittany were given exactly 2 hours to vacate the premises. They were not allowed to take the luxury cars parked in the driveway. Those belonged to the leasing companies and the payments were months in arrears. They could not pack the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, or the crystal chandeliers. Those assets were officially seized to pay down the massive debt I now controlled. My mother and sister walked out of their gilded cage carrying only a few suitcases of clothes, stepping onto the cold, wet pavement with absolutely nothing left to their names. Their new reality was a harsh, unforgiving wake-up call. Without Howard's fraudulent income and with their own bank accounts severely overdrawn, Linda and Brittany had been forced to rent a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a run-down, decaying complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. The contrast to their former life was staggering. The paint on their new building was peeling, the heating pipes clanked violently through the night, and the view from their single living room window was a rusted chain-link fence bordering a discount strip mall. There were no country club brunches, no personal shoppers, and no catered dinners. They were living the exact life of struggle they had mocked me for allegedly having. Brittany was suffering the most brutal, humiliating reality check of all. The recording from the wedding had not stayed within those vaulted chapel walls. In the era of smartphones, several high society guests had recorded the audio of the spectacular collapse and leaked it to the press. Brittany was not just a canceled bride, she was a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. The entire East Coast public relations industry treated her like toxic waste. She desperately tried to apply for jobs, realizing she needed to generate some kind of income to keep the lights on in their dismal apartment. But her name was now synonymous with corporate espionage, extortion, and high society fraud. She walked into mid-level marketing firms, hoping her previous title would secure her a position, only to be escorted right back out by human resources directors who openly laughed at her resume. Nobody wanted to hire a public relations executive who was a verified walking public relations disaster. She was entirely unemployable. Without a paycheck, the crushing weight of her financial arrogance set in. The $100,000 wedding gown she had ruined with her tears was repossessed by the boutique, but the massive predatory credit card debt she had racked up preparing for her billionaire lifestyle remained. Debt collection agencies hounded her cell phone day and night. She was drowning in overdue notices, late fees, and compounding interest. The heavy metal platinum cards she used to flaunt at exclusive restaurants were all canceled and shredded, leaving her to count pennies and use expired coupons at the local grocery store. Linda was faring no better. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had spent her entire life judging others based on their zip codes and designer labels was now trapped in a squalid apartment entirely dependent on a daughter who could not even afford basic utilities. Linda's elite bridge club friends had blocked her number the second the FBI raid hit the evening news. The charity boards she used to chair had publicly severed all ties, issuing statements condemning her husband's financial crimes. She spent her days sitting on a cheap second-hand sofa she had found at a thrift store, staring blankly at the stained, water-damaged walls. Linda was completely unable to process how her meticulously crafted dynasty had been reduced to absolute rubble. She had sacrificed her eldest daughter, enabled a criminal husband, and sold her youngest child to a toxic billionaire, all to maintain a facade that had burned to the ground in a matter of minutes. They had spent years treating me like a disappointment because I chose to build something real with my own hands instead of chasing superficial status. Now they were sitting in the dark in a freezing apartment utterly destroyed by the very vanity they had worshipped. The karma was not just poetic, it was surgically precise. They were completely isolated, drowning in debt, and drowning in the agonizing realization that they had absolutely no one to blame but themselves. While they were freezing in that squalid apartment, I was sitting in the climate-controlled executive boardroom of Caldwell Agronomics. I was reviewing the final architectural blueprints for our new automated hydroponic facility in the Midwest. Liam sat across the massive oak table discussing supply chain logistics with our lead engineers. The stark contrast between my current reality and the miserable existence my mother and sister were currently enduring was not lost on me. I had built a multi-million-dollar empire from the dirt up, while they had burned their entire world to the ground, chasing an illusion of status. My private cell phone vibrated against the polished mahogany table. The screen displayed an unknown local number. I normally ignored unsolicited calls, but my corporate security team had advised me to monitor any unverified contact attempts given the ongoing federal investigations into my father. I held up a hand signaling Liam for a brief pause and stepped out into the quiet glass-walled corridor to take the call. I pressed the green button and raised the phone to my ear. I did not say a word, simply waiting for the caller to speak first. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing and the faint, tinny noise of highway traffic in the background. Then a voice broke the silence. "Abigail, please do not hang up." It was Linda. Her voice was completely stripped of its usual haughty, commanding resonance. It sounded brittle, hoarse, and thick with sheer desperation. She was crying, letting out the wet, ugly sounds of a woman who had finally run out of other people to manipulate. I remained perfectly silent, leaning against the cool glass of the corridor wall, my expression an unreadable mask. "Abigail, I know you are there," Linda sobbed, the panic bleeding into her frantic words. "We have absolutely nothing left. The heating in this awful apartment is broken, and the landlord refuses to fix it because our credit is ruined. Brittany has not stopped crying for 3 weeks. We are eating canned soup because the government food assistance application takes months to process. Please, you have to help us. You are my daughter. You cannot just leave your own mother and sister to rot in a place like this." She paused, gasping for air, waiting for me to offer the comforting reassurance I used to crave from her when I was a child. When I offered nothing but a vast freezing silence, she pushed harder, pivoting to her classic demands wrapped in a victim complex. "You have to call off Harrison." Linda pleaded, her voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch. "Your lawyers are taking every single cent we have left to pay off those debts. You already took the house and the cars. You proved your point. Just drop the collections lawsuits. Tell them to back off so we can breathe. And we need an allowance, Abigail. Just a small monthly stipend. $5,000 a month. That is nothing to you and Liam now. It is pocket change. Just send us enough to move into a decent neighborhood and get Brittany back on her feet. We are family. You owe us that much after destroying our lives." The sheer, unbelievable audacity of her request echoed through the receiver. She was sitting in a decaying apartment, destitute because of her husband's federal crimes and her own boundless greed, and she still genuinely believed she was entitled to my money. She still believed I owed her a luxury lifestyle. She was not calling to apologize for discarding me. She was not calling to apologize for verbally abusing me for decades. She was not calling to apologize for trying to frame my company for a federal embezzlement scheme. She was calling because she was cold hungry and entirely out of options. I listened to her weeping, trying to detect even a singular ounce of genuine maternal affection or regret. There was none. There was only the raw, animalistic panic of a parasite that had been violently detached from its host. I felt my pulse remain perfectly steady. My breathing did not hitch, My hands did not shake. The invisible suffocating cord that had tethered me to her toxic approval for my entire life was completely gone. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I felt absolutely wonderfully nothing. "Are you finished, Linda?" I asked, my voice carrying the smooth clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a microscopic slide. Linda choked on a sob, stunned by the absolute zero temperature of my tone. "Abigail, please. I am going to stop you right there," I interrupted smoothly, slicing through her pathetic performance with effortless precision. "I want you to think very carefully about the words you chose to hurl at me for the past decade. You stood in front of 100 elite guests and explicitly stated that I was an embarrassment. You called me a bitter, jealous failure. You told everyone I was wasting my life digging in the mud." I took a slow, deep breath, delivering the final fatal reality check she so desperately needed. "I am just a dirt-playing failure, Linda," I stated, quoting her own vicious insults back to her with razor-sharp accuracy. "I am just a useless girl with a silly little hobby who wears cheap clothes and dates poor farmers. My dirty, insignificant money could never possibly be enough to feed and house noble high society people like you and your favorite daughter. You are going to have to find another billionaire to parasitize, because this one is officially closing her bank accounts to you forever." But Abigail Linda screamed, a sound of absolute primal terror ripping from her throat. "Enjoy your canned soup," I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear, cutting off her hysterical shrieking, and ended the call. I did not hesitate for a single second. I opened the contact settings, selected the unknown number, and pressed block. The digital confirmation flashed on the screen, sealing the barrier between my present and my past. The line was dead. The connection was permanently severed. I would never hear her voice again. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The hallway was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the central air conditioning and the distant murmur of my employees working in the laboratories below. I stood there for a moment, letting the profound silence wash over me. For 33 years, my mother's voice had lived in my head, constantly telling me I was not enough, driving me to work myself into the ground, just to earn a fraction of the respect she freely handed to my sister. Now that voice was entirely erased. I had silenced her not with anger or vengeance, but with the immovable wall of my own self-worth. I had refused to participate in her toxic cycle any longer. I had starved the fire of her manipulation by simply refusing to give her any more oxygen. I turned around and pushed open the heavy glass door to the boardroom. Liam looked up from the architectural blueprints, his blue eyes searching my face for any sign of distress. He saw none. He saw only a woman who had just successfully amputated a diseased limb and was ready to move forward with her life. "Everything all right?" Liam asked gently, setting his pen down on the table. "Everything is perfect," I replied, walking back to my chair and taking my seat at the head of the table. I smoothed my hands over the blueprints, a genuine, unburdened smile breaking across my face. "Let us get back to work. We have an empire to build." 6 months later, the Valley Research property did not look like a science fair project. It looked exactly like the future of American agriculture. I stood at the edge of the sprawling 2,000-acre organic farm, the afternoon sun warming my face. Rows of automated harvesting drones hovered silently over acres of nutrient-dense crops, feeding real-time data directly into my company's mainframe. The massive glass greenhouses stretched toward the horizon, powered by gleaming solar arrays, and sustained by the exact same water filtration technology that Spencer had tried so desperately to shut down. This was the land Howard had attempted to sell to a commercial developer to save his own skin. Now it was a fully operational, federally protected agricultural fortress, and it belonged entirely to me. A polished black SUV pulled up to the main administration building behind me. A team of executives from the largest independent grocery cooperative in North America stepped out. They had not come to negotiate, they had come to finalize. I walked back to the outdoor staging area where a simple wooden table had been set up right next to the active fields. There were no crystal chandeliers here. There was no imported caviar or expensive champagne. There was just fresh air, the smell of rich soil, and the undeniable tangible proof of my life's work. The lead executive, A seasoned industry veteran shook my hand firmly and slid a thick, heavy contract across the wooden table. It was a national supply agreement, a 10-year exclusive partnership that instantly tripled my company's valuation. Your crop yield data outperforms every single competitor on the market, Abigail, the executive, stated, his voice filled with genuine professional respect. You are not just upgrading the supply chain, you are completely rewriting the industry standard. We are honored to be in business with you. I signed my name with a steady, confident hand. I did not need Howard's manipulative connections to get into this room. I did not need Liam's billionaire status to leverage the deal or co-sign my authority. The cooperative had chosen my company entirely because our scientific methodology and operational efficiency were mathematically untouchable. I had won this massive national contract on my absolute undeniable own merit. Liam stood a few feet away, leaning casually against the wooden railing of the observation deck. He was wearing his familiar worn boots and a faded denim jacket, looking perfectly at home among my scientists and field managers. He watched me hand the signed documents back to the executives. There was no patronizing pride in his eyes. There was only the profound, silent respect of one corporate titan acknowledging another. After the executives drove away, leaving behind a contract that cemented my empire, Liam walked over and wrapped his arms around my waist. He kissed my forehead, breathing in the scent of the open fields and the crisp afternoon air. You did it, Abigail, he said softly, looking out over the endless green expanse. The entire national grid is yours. I smiled, leaning back against his chest. We did it, I corrected gently. But this contract right here, this was my signature on the line. Liam chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated against my shoulders. I never doubted it for a single second. I am just lucky I get to stand next to the woman running the show. I stepped out of his embrace and walked slightly further into the field. I knelt down and scooped up a handful of the rich, dark soil. It stained my hands, clinging to my skin and settling under my fingernails, just like my father had always mocked. But as I rubbed the cool earth between my fingers, I did not feel the lingering sting of embarrassment. I felt absolute, undeniable power. For 33 years, I had allowed my family to dictate my worth. I had internalized their toxic belief that success was measured by designer labels, country club memberships, and the exhausting ability to project a flawless illusion to people who fundamentally did not care about us. They called me a disappointment because I refused to participate in their endless, shallow masquerade. They called me an ugly dropout because I chose to build a solid foundation in the dirt instead of constructing a fragile house of cards in the sky. My father sacrificed his freedom and his integrity for an illusion of wealth. My mother traded her dignity and her maternal instincts for a prestigious zip code. My sister sold her soul and her future for a last name she could not even afford to carry. They spent their entire lives running from the reality of who they were, and in the end, that reality caught up and crushed them completely. They were left with absolutely nothing because they had built their entire lives on a foundation of lies. But I had built my life on the solid ground I was currently standing on. I had watered it with my own sweat, funded it with my own relentless labor, and protected it with a ruthless calculation I never knew I possessed until they forced my hand. Cutting my family out of my life was not an act of cruelty or petty vengeance. It was a necessary life-saving amputation. You cannot grow a healthy, thriving empire when your roots are infected with poison. The silence they left behind was not empty. It was peaceful. The absence of my mother's shrill criticism and my father's heavy-handed demands had created a vast open space where my own voice could finally be heard. I stood up, brushing the dark soil from my hands, and looked back at Liam waiting for me by the administration building. He was not my savior. He was my partner. I had not needed him to rescue me from my family. I had needed him to stand beside me while I rescued myself. My name is Abigail. I am a farmer. I play in the dirt. I wear sensible shoes, and I do not care about high society approval. I am also the sole chief executive officer of a national agricultural syndicate, a self-made multimillionaire, and a woman who finally understands her own unshakable value. I did not inherit a legacy. I did not marry into a dynasty. I built an empire from the soil up, and nobody will ever take it away from me. The narratives shared above all weave together a powerful, unifying thread. Your self-worth is never determined by your biological family's ability to recognize it. Across these stories of profound betrayal, whether it was parents prioritizing a lavish wedding over a grandson's medical treatment, a family plotting to steal a trust fund, or a mother abandoning her teenage daughter at an airport, the protagonists all faced a devastating reality. They learned that the people who were supposed to offer unconditional love instead viewed relationships as transactions for social status, financial gain, or ego preservation. The most vital lesson here is the transformative power of boundaries and self-reliance. For years, these women suffered under the weight of impossible expectations, desperately seeking validation from relatives who were fundamentally incapable of offering it. However, their ultimate triumphs did not come solely from their financial success, their brilliant legal maneuvers, or the public downfall of their abusers. The true victory occurred internally. It happened the exact moment they stopped participating in a rigged game and accepted that blood does not obligate anyone to endure manipulation or cruelty. These stories teach us that family is a title earned through mutual respect, sacrifice, and showing up when it matters most, rather than simply sharing DNA. By completely cutting ties with their toxic relatives, these women did not just protect their wealth and careers, they protected their peace. They proved that sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the environments that diminish you, creating the space to build your own authentic life from the ground up. Evaluate your own relationships today and establish the firm boundaries necessary to protect your peace and build a life that truly honors your worth.